Good morning. On this 4th of July, 1996, you're looking at a live picture from the mall in the nation's capital. Those are the fireworks canisters all lined up for tonight's celebration honoring Independence Day in the United States. And a live picture on your screen right now from Independence Hall in Philadelphia. That city as well, which calls itself the cradle of liberty, marks Independence Day with all sorts of festivities. We'll be there live this morning during Washington Journal. Here's what's ahead. We have lots of topics on the table this morning, and we begin with you and your phone calls from around the country. We'll be looking at the morning newspapers and asking you to phone in with articles you found of interest. We'll also be getting an update on the Yeltsin victory in the Russian elections. Then our newspaper roundtable comes next. Our guest this morning, Congressman Tom Davis of Virginia, and Christopher Hitchens, contributing editor to Vanity Fair. Several features in our program today. We'll be talking from Philadelphia Live with Shimon Peres, the former Prime Minister of Israel, on Israel after their recent elections. And also, we'll be visiting the Liberty Bell this morning. Joanne Blacoe is a park ranger at Independence National Historical Site. We'll be visiting the Liberty Bell, learning more about the sites tourists will be visiting there today, and she'll take your phone calls about that icon of American history. And then finally this morning, in our last segment, you'll meet the founder of the Libertarian Party. His name is David Nolan, and that party is gathering in Washington, D.C. today for their nominating convention for their candidate for president. We'll learn more about the party and its issues and take your telephone calls. Well, we begin this morning with the New York Times, and we will show you an annual tradition for the New York Times on your screen if we can. The Declaration of Independence they print each year in its original text. You'll find it on the back page of the front section this morning if you pick up the New York Times all around the country. 220 years ago today, this declaration made in Philadelphia. We'll be talking about some of the editorials in this morning's newspaper about the Independence Day celebration in just a minute, but let's tell you how you participate. If you would like to join in this morning, and we'd especially like to hear from some viewers who watch us regularly but don't often have the time to call in, but today with the holiday might have a few extra minutes. Here's how you do it. Find an article in your hometown newspaper that's something new or something that's catching your attention, and phone it in to us. You also can have an article from a magazine that's made you think, and you want to talk about that. If you're living in the Eastern or Central time zones, 202-624-1111 is the phone number to reach us. If you're watching out west, 202-624-1115. And as always, we have a fax line for your articles and comments. It's 202-393-3346. I'm going to take our phone calls very quickly, but we're going to show you some of the editorials inspired by this Independence Day celebration. Begin with the Baltimore Sun here, available to us in the East Coast area around Baltimore and Washington. 4th of July, number 220. Here's how the editorialists close. They tell us a few historical sites from past presidential elections, including the contest for presidency which Jefferson took part in. It says, Jefferson, the first Secretary of State, thought Hamilton, quote, bewitched and perverted by the British example, i.e. the monarchy, a charge loaded with demonization of King George III and memories of the War for Independence. Goes on to cite other historical examples of rhetoric in early presidential debates. They close this way. All of this is worth remembering on this election year, 4th of July, because the nation has proven again and again that it can survive the worst verbal excess the parties can offer. Political invective is as American as hot dogs, apple pie, and the 4th of July. So let us celebrate this 220th Independence Day with a salute to the underlying strength, common sense, and good humor of the nation. Let the Pols shoot their fireworks in the days ahead. July 4th is the day for the best kind of fireworks. We'll look at a few more in other newspapers. First, Youngstown, Ohio. Good morning.
Good morning. We're looking at an article in the Youngstown Vindicator.
Yes, sir. The president is actually visiting Youngstown today.
Yes, it's our 200th anniversary. And we have an article by Mark Niquette of the Vindicator. It says, Trafficant visit serves as a reminder of crucial role of Mahoning Valley, and the president's advance team was here Tuesday to arrange details of the visit. Trafficant is one of the only Democrats that I would ever vote for. He's been pretty good, and he says pretty much that we also have an article about Youngstown's mayor hopes President Clinton brings promising news, and Mayor Pat J. Ungaro says federal recognition of Mahoning Valley revitalization efforts may have played a role in President Clinton's decision to visit the city. He came here last time in '92 and made a whole bunch of promises about, everything from investing in $10 million in money from community development block grants, and none of the promises came true. So this time, I guess they're going to try and hold his feet to the fire.
Are you going to see the president today?
No, I'm not. Like I said, I'm not a supporter.
Can you tell me a little bit about how Youngstown is marking its 200th birthday?
We're going to have a celebration all throughout this first part of the year. They've been running articles on the actual how Youngstown was created and where the county seat was, and a whole bunch of good articles that I didn't know about Youngstown.
Tell me a little bit about yourself, will you, sir?
Sure.
How old are you? What do you do for a living?
I'm 42 years old. I'm an engineer.
And politically, where do you stand?
Politically, I'm more independent than anything, but I lean right. I'm very conservative. I feel conservative.
All right. Thanks very much for calling in this morning. Appreciate your participation. Ruston, Indiana, I understand you're reading the New York Times.
Yes, it's Ruston, Louisiana.
Louisiana. Sorry about that. Good morning.
Good morning. You all right this morning?
Yes, sir. What you read in the paper that caught your attention today?
Op-ed column by William Sapphire. The title of it is "Their Just Powers." I assume he gets that from the phrase in the Declaration that says governments are instituted among men deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. His column starts off with a little history of Watergate, and it kind of goes into the some of the problems that the Clinton White House is going through, the FBI files, and he talks a little bit about the executive privilege that they tried to use on the travel office documents. And a couple of quotes from his column is, from the start, the Clinton White House has been abusing the police power for political purpose. And then he ends up his column with an entreaty here. He says, "This is America which rebelled at the abuse of power. Happy Independence Day."
He also has a paragraph in there about what he thinks about both the Aldrich book and the Woodward book, doesn't he?
Well, I've just kind of, and not really that much about it. He mostly goes into the things that are pretty well established in fact.
Mm-hmm. Well, tell me why this in particular, does it echo your point of view?
Well, yeah, I think that's what Independence Day is all about. I mean, certainly the problems that the White House has, they don't compare with what happened 220 years ago, but I'm sure they started out with just a little nip here and a little tuck there. I mean, King George, he would kick in the doors with the redcoats and no warrants and so forth. I think it's something that we have to be on guard for forever. Liberty has to be guarded jealously.
All right, sir. Would you mind telling us a little about yourself on this holiday?
Oh, I'm a salesman. I'm 46. I lived in Louisiana all my life. I'm conservative.
What do you sell?
Engineering and construction, estimating, that type of thing.
Well, welcome to the program. Thanks for participating.
Okay, goodbye. Next
is Falls Church, Virginia. Good morning, caller.
Good morning.
What are you reading today, sir?
In the Washington Times about this new book on the media's bias in the Clinton presidency, and just how awful it sounds like it's been in the last 4 years.
What can you tell us about the author of the book?
Well, it's by a guy from the Media Research Center, Tim Graham, and he has looked at the media, since Clinton's elected, and it talks about how the ABC producer Rick Kaplan helped Clinton during the 1992 campaign. It's not a story I heard a lot about at the time. He did not deny Spy Magazine's 1992 report that he attended Clinton campaign staff meetings and helped set up the campaign's press office. This is the kind of thing that really makes the American people wonder about where this press is coming from. You know, that these people would actually just work for the campaign while it's going on. And, you know, when Senator Dole tries to make a thing yesterday about the media having a liberal bias, everybody says he's just whining. I think this is a lot more serious than that, and these people have to try to answer the questions that this book and other people have to say about it. It's not just whining, it's a reality.
Here's Rowan Scarborough's piece I was showing the audience as you were talking. It's on page 2. Where they put their book reviews, and the gentleman who writes the book, author Tim Graham, he reports that Mr. Graham is not breaking new ground in alleging a liberal media bias. His newsletter is published by Brent Bozell's Media Research Center, which regularly zings the press for promoting left-leaning people and ideas.
Well, it's probably a pretty easy job. I mean, it's there to be found, and you know, he talks in here about Rick Kaplan and also Strobe Talbot, who's now the Deputy Secretary of State, who was with Time Magazine.
Right. Tell me about yourself, would you, sir? A little bit about yourself on this holiday morning. How old are you? What do you do for a living?
Huh?
Would you tell me a little bit about yourself? Have a little extra time on the holiday learning more about our audience.
Oh.
How old are you? What do you do for a living?
I'm 32 years old, and I'm an auto mechanic.
An auto mechanic. And your politics are where on this?
Well, I'm obviously kind of a conservative. I'm reading the Washington Times.
Well, maybe you like to read things that you don't agree with from time to time. Hard to tell from just what you read. How long have you been a conservative, and who influenced you?
Oh, probably about 16 years now. And obviously, I think Ronald Reagan's a major influence.
All right, sir, thanks for your call this morning from Falls Church, Virginia. It's the suburbs outside Washington. Our next caller of the morning is from Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm reading an article in the St. Paul Pioneer Press. It's tobacco bans, Toronto bans smoking in bars.
Hearing a lot about cigarettes and tobacco this week, aren't we?
Yes. And well, it says, I guess I can read, city has passed the toughest anti-smoking measure in Canada, voting to ban smoking in all restaurants, bars, and entertainment facilities in the country's largest city. I have a couple of questions for Dole about this. I'd like him to explain the difference between, well, besides the fact that nicotine is legal, I'd like him to explain the difference, the moral difference between smoking tobacco and smoking pot or hemp. And I think that maybe Dole should, in order to be morally consistent, should support an amendment for the decriminalization of all other harmful addictive drugs, like in Holland. And I think if tobacco growing subsidies are so good, how much PAC money would it take to brainwash him into supporting opium poppy for farmer subsidies? And
how about a little bit about yourself this morning, sir? We've been asking callers to tell us a little bit about folks watching this morning. Can you tell us your age and what you do for a living?
I'm in real estate, and I'm about 50. And
how about your politics?
Well, I'm kind of all over the. Last time I voted for Ross Perot, and in the local election 2 years ago, I voted for our Tommy Thompson, who's a Republican, and I've also voted for our Steve Gunderson, who's also a Republican. But usually, this time anyway, I'm going to be voting for Clinton. And I wish I would have voted for him the first time. And I think he's put up with an awful lot of this kind of hypocrisy and from the Republicans. A lot of this flack, I think, is undeserved.
What kind of real estate do you sell, commercial or residential?
Residential.
How's business been?
It's okay.
Thanks for calling in this morning. Next is Houston, Texas with the Houston Chronicle. While we're listening to that call, I want to show you we've had a caller that mentioned Ronald Reagan and another that mentioned former Senator Dole. Lots of photographs in all our papers this morning of a meeting in California between the two yesterday. Good morning, Houston, Texas. What's on your mind?
Good morning. I would just like to visit in reference to Mr. Clinton, our president. Just read an article this morning about the Whitewater prosecutors trying to link checks and patronage jobs. And it just breaks my heart to see over and over again that there is so much mud slung at President and Mrs. Clinton.
And can you tell us about yourself, please?
I am a 60-year-old woman. I am a businesswoman. I am also in real estate, just like your last caller. Isn't that interesting?
Are you a Democrat?
You know, in the past, I voted for Mr. Bush because I really felt very strong about his ability. However, and I'm sorry, not the last time, but the time before, this time I voted for Mr. Clinton. I consider him to be an extraordinarily bright man, and I consider him to be a very, very good president.
All right.
And it just breaks my heart that over and over again, people are trying to destroy him. I think that is just terrible, the lack of respect that is taking place for our president.
Tell me how real estate is doing in Houston. Our last caller said just okay.
Wonderful.
The economy's doing well there?
Absolutely.
Does that factor into your decision for the election, how the economy's doing?
You know, it certainly helps. However, I put a lot of factors into whom I elect. I want to have someone that has a heart, someone that is going to continue to teach our children, which are tomorrow's future. We do need to be able to stand the pressures of this world, which it is getting much smaller. Our communication systems are instantaneous. We do need to educate our youngsters. We do need to make absolutely sure that this country remains the strongest country in the world.
Okay, thanks for your call from Houston. Right now, joining us by telephone from Moscow is Sally Donnelly for Time magazine, who's been there covering specifically the Russian elections, which are making front page news, not only, I'm sure, in all the papers here, but around the world. Good morning, Ms. Donnelly. Actually, good day to you.
Good morning.
Can you tell me a bit about give us some sense of how this, what's being described as very, very strong victory occurred? What went into it, do you think?
Well, I think the Yeltsin campaign was actually pretty successful in playing this campaign as a choice between going forward with what this sort of semi-democratic, semi-reformist government, or in a sense going backwards to a communist past or even a semi-communist past that people didn't know what they were going to get. And I think what you can generalize about Russians today is that what they're sort of desperately seeking is some sense of order and stability. And I think this election showed that people do not want to return to something that either they had bad feelings about before or that would create a new sense of instability and disorder.
We had been hearing reports and speculation about Boris Yeltsin's health. What can you tell us about the state of it? Has he been making an effort to be seen publicly now?
He has not made an effort to be seen in public today. He did make a television address, which is how his campaign has been handling the last, I'd say, week almost, is with a series of taped appearances by Mr. Yeltsin, not allowing him actually to get close to particularly the Western press, which is obviously very worrying. But in the TV address, he spoke clearly, if slowly, but you know, he did appear to sort of be with it, as we say, and not in pain or not uncomfortable.
Sally Donnelly can stay with us for a few minutes and answer some questions about the Russian elections if you have those specifically. So if you do, their phone numbers are on the screen. Please tell our producer if you've got an issue on another topic, either don't dial now or we'll put you on hold and get back to you in a few minutes. The question asked by the Washington Post on the inside page of its story is, Russian election is decisive, but for how long? What's your reaction to that?
Well, I think that addresses not only Yeltsin's health physically, how long can this man last in power, and if he does die, you know, that creates an entirely new set of circumstances where the prime minister takes over as an acting head of state, and then another 3 months from now, or 3 months from that date, another presidential election is called, and that in a country that is suffering, I think, from election fatigue, that's a troubling prospect. It also, I think, addresses the issue of even if he is alive and semi-healthy, how much can he control the sort of battling political forces around him? And I think that's something we have to see. Maybe a good sign today was the Speaker of the Parliament. He's a communist, and the Parliament has a very strong representation of communists and is dominated by communists and nationalists, said that the Parliament, he thought, would be willing to accept Yeltsin's proposal for Prime Minister Viktor Chernomyrdin to keep his post as Prime Minister. And Chernomyrdin is seen, again, to use that word stability, but is seen as a symbol of stability and continuing reform. So that would be a positive step, I would think.
In citing some of the questions they raise in this article in the Post, they do cite the political forces, they cite his health. And in the political forces specifically, they talk about the alliance with what they describe as a powerful national security chief in Alexander Lebed. They describe him as the fact that he's now become Yeltsin's heir apparent, despite a lack of political experience and highly dubious commitment to the democratic process.
I actually I take issue, I guess, with the proposal that he is the heir apparent. I think that's not yet clear. He has been very prominent in the press, but whether that was an aspect of Yeltsin's campaign strategy, whether that was an aspect of sympathetic press, and whether that's an aspect of Lebed's perhaps own personality, all those things I think should be taken into account. And I think there are a number of political forces that have invested themselves in Prime Minister Chernomyrdin and his sort of team, who might take issue with Lebed being considered the heir apparent to Yeltsin at this point.
On the note of the sympathetic press, the Post again cites the national news media who, because they were fearful of a communist comeback, forfeited their hard-fought independence and served Yeltsin's interests.
That's 100% correct. Maybe it's 200% correct, and that's why I would caution anyone against calling this a fully democratic election, because this press was bought lock, stock, and barrel. Not only bought literally with money, but bought sort of emotionally and morally. They gave up their independence, I'd say 6 weeks or 2 months ago, and campaigned for what they thought was in their best interest.
Let's see if our viewers have a few questions for you before we let you go. We have a viewer on the line from Aberdeen, New Jersey. Good morning.
Good morning. This is I just wanted to ask a question regarding the successor, Alexander Lebed, to Boris Yeltsin. He had stated earlier when he fired some army generals that were involved in some corruption, and that he was going to be the, what would you call it, the new light that would come to Russia to clean up the crime. Did that have anything to do with the vote that Yeltsin just won?
Thanks very much. Sally Donnelly?
Yes, I think it had a considerable pull to attract voters who, in the first round, did not vote for Yeltsin. There were 11 million who voted for Lebed directly. But it also convinced those people who maybe were considering sitting out this second round or were undecided about Yeltsin, that they consider Lebed to be a strong, untainted, uncorrupt force and sort of a good new wind blowing through the Yeltsin administration. So I think, and particularly Lebed's high level of visibility after the first round and before the second round gave a boost to Yeltsin's campaign. I would caution again the viewer called Lebed the successor to Yeltsin. Constitutionally, he is not, and de facto, he is not in any way a successor to Yeltsin. He may be playing up that himself, and people here may be playing that up. But if Yeltsin died tomorrow, which I don't expect him to do, he would not immediately become Yeltsin's successor.
Where are you physically today? Where are you talking to us from?
I'm in Moscow in our office just down the street from the Russian White House.
What's it like in Moscow today?
Well, it would be surprising, I think, for an American involved in covering political elections. There's a real sense of maybe relief here, but not celebration, or not maybe from the communist point of view protest. There's you get a sense there's sort of a tiredness or exhaustion after this election, and there was certainly nothing planned, neither camp planned a post-election party because they were very concerned about how the election would turn out.
Well, thank you very much for speaking with us. We'll be looking for your byline in the magazine next week. What particular story will you be writing?
Well, we have an interesting story coming up that will sort of take an inside look at how the Yeltsin campaign managed to pull off what many people thought was the impossible task just 6 or 4 months ago, and brought Yeltsin to victory. I think it'll be a good story.
Appreciate your spending some time with us today.
Sure, thanks.
Sally Donnelly writes for Time magazine. This is what the current cover of the magazine looks like. A story inside about Russia, but of course filed before the election. And today on the front pages of all the papers we have here, Mr. Yeltsin's victory in that runoff election. Back to your calls on other topics, and our viewer is next on the line from Stuart, Florida. Good morning.
Yes, hi, my name's Eric, and I wasn't going to call in, but when I heard somebody say that the election was bought and paid for, and that the media was obviously anti-communist, for crying out loud, something good for a change, was being attacked, like the media lost its independence and picked a side. What's been going on here for the past 20 years? I mean, I've seen journalism students that are 90% registered Democrat, and very few Republicans go into the journalism field. So if fair to say that journalists tend to lean to the left, which is what we've been saying for 10 and 15 years. Now the kettle's calling the pot black. It just seems kind of curious.
Thanks for your call. Before you go, sir, will you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I'm been retired. I moved out from California. I was in the appliance business.
And how old are you?
I'm familiar with bait and switch.
How old are you?
I'm 37.
You retired early.
Yes.
What are you doing with yourself there?
It's pretty easy living down here. I don't work.
Well, it sounds pretty nice to some of us. Thanks for calling in this morning.
All righty.
Next is San Diego, California. You got a newspaper story for us this morning?
Yes. Not only a newspaper story, but I happen to meet 2 Lithuanians that are from Lithuania, born and raised under the Russian rule. And I'm Lithuanian, and I'm celebrating my 82nd birthday.
Well, congratulations, sir.
And I'm retired.
What are you retired from? What line of work?
What kind of work?
Yes.
You name it, and I've done it. I started as a barber back in 1929. I'm a recovered alcoholic, and that's the biggest problem in Russia. Alcohol in your movie theaters.
And what do you make of...
And Boris is an alcoholic, in case nobody knows it.
Well, what do you make of the election returns yesterday?
Well, the election return, in my opinion, I think it's very dangerous. But I think the main problem is, like the Lithuanians are saying, is the movie industry. There's the main cause of smoking, alcoholics, drinking. Now, showing Boris the way he is dancing, his main physical problem is alcohol.
All right, sir. Thank you for your special perspective on the story. Appreciate your calling in. Vero Beach, Florida. Good morning. At the newspaper.
Yes.
What are you reading?
Hello.
Yes, what are you reading today?
Okay. From the Vero Beach Press Journal, and it says White House ushered in file. There's another instance of Hillary Clinton in an IRS file. She had weeks before a White House usher was fired at Hillary Rodham Clinton's instructions. The administration sought the usher's confidential IRS file, even though he wasn't due for a background check for 3 more years, according to documents.
And what's your reaction to that?
Well, I think it's just typical of the whole Clinton administration. I mean, it's constant, and I get so upset when I hear these people calling in and praising him, because half the things he's done, he takes credit for, he has not done himself. And the other thing is that they lie up one side and down the other. And I can't believe that there's anyone in America that wouldn't see it, wouldn't realize it.
Can you tell us about yourself?
I'm in real estate, too.
This is a big morning.
In a row.
Big morning for real estate agents.
You bet.
How long have you lived in Vero Beach, Florida?
Almost 12 years.
And
I'm originally from Minneapolis.
Okay, we've asked everyone their age this morning. Will you tell us how old you are?
61, July 1st.
And how's real estate doing in Vero Beach this morning?
It's doing pretty well, really. It's a great little city, though, you know, little city by the sea.
And the economy's been doing well there?
Yes, it does pretty well. I think if they'd ever pass that capital gains or change the capital gains It would do a lot for real estate throughout the whole country. Would certainly help it more.
Thank you for participating.
Thank you. I have to say, I can't believe I got through. I have tried for years.
Well, must be the holiday.
Well,
we're delighted to have you. Thanks for trying again.
Bye-bye.
Next is New Orleans. Good morning. What are you reading?
Libertarian Party News.
And as you know, we're going to be covering the Libertarian Convention today and tomorrow.
Yes.
Are you a Libertarian?
Yes.
Why aren't you here?
Couldn't afford it. Plus, I'm taking exams.
Taking exams for what?
Fortran.
For what, I'm sorry?
Computer science.
Computer science. And what are you going to be doing with after you pass the exams?
Teaching college and high school.
And what does it mean to you to be a libertarian?
Well, given the two parties and the way they work, especially since your caller has been complaining about the prices of real estate, the fact that pot is not legalized, the criminal justice system, and with the fact that the Libertarians stand for a lot better reforms than any other parties that are going out there, like the House call, which is a fun story about the size of the congressional membership that we're putting on the field in 1996, especially the fact we're running nearly 218 members, which would give us a chance to have a majority for the first time since 1920 for any political party.
How long have you been a libertarian?
About 4 years and about 6 years in spirit.
And tell us your age, please.
30.
30. Thanks for participating. And during the final part of our program this morning, we'll introduce our audience to the founder of the Libertarian Party and learn a little bit more about the party's plans for the 1996 convention. Well, thanks to all of you for participating. Appreciate those of you who took time to call in and shared a little bit of your personal biographies with us this morning on this holiday morning. And more time for newspapers during our newspaper roundtable about a half an hour from now. Right now, we take you to Philadelphia. Philadelphia, since 1989, has been giving out a Liberty Medal each year, and they have co-winners this year. Shimon Peres, the former Prime Minister of Israel, is the co-winner who will be on site today. And it is also being awarded to King Hussein of Jordan, who is being awarded the honor in absentia. Right now, we're being joined live from Philadelphia by Shimon Peres. Good morning, Mr. Peres. Thank you for being with us.
Good morning.
Can you tell me a bit about what you believe the story or the lesson of the Israeli elections is with this couple weeks perspective?
Well, actually, it's very hard to point out where did it go wrong, because the difference was so tiny one. The difference was less than 0.5%, as you know. And for example, we know in some of the religious quarters, the vote participation went up to 95%. In the more secular quarters, it wasn't more than 75%. So even the participation and the devotion to the elections have had an effect upon it. But basically, I believe there were two problems. Problem number one is that this was a double campaign, one against enemies, against the terrorists, who did affect very much the mood of the nation, and the other was against opponents who felt differently about the peace process. I do believe that the real problem was fighting terror. It has introduced doubts in the hearts of the people, and I personally have had to devote all of my energies to prevent the terrorists from continuing to act against us.
Last night on CNN, Prime Minister Netanyahu said that if Shimon Peres had won by even a single vote, I would consider it a mandate. I hope that people will consider my small margin a mandate. Your reaction?
Yes, it is a mandate. I don't deny it and I don't argue with it. But at the same time, let's not forget that half a nation still supported the policies that I represent. So while I accept a mandate, I don't close my eyes to the division.
What plans do you have for being involved in public life and public debate going forward?
Well, it depends very much upon what the government is going to do. If they will do the right things, I shall support them. If they will do the wrong things, I shall oppose them. All the time turning to the source of our authority, which means the people themselves. And we shall do a job of explaining and convincing. You know, I have quite a long life in politics, and they never know when does a politician win and when does he lose. I saw many politicians who won elections and they didn't know what to do with their winning. I know others who lost elections and it created great opportunities to change situation. I may think about myself that I got out more of the losses than of the winnings.
Could you explain a little further?
Sure. You know, in our own party, the late Prime Minister Rabin and myself went through a series of elections. In many of them, I won. In the last one, he won. Now, his winning created for me a great opportunity to devote all my energies and attentions for the peace process. Furthermore, we reached an understanding, and I do believe that the fact that the two of us were working together for the same cause with full trust enabled us in short 4 years to achieve much more than other governments would try to achieve, say, in 8 or 10 years. That would be a good example.
I want to tell our audience, Mr. Prez, that you have agreed to take their questions by telephone. And you can be with us for about 10 more minutes, and we will put our C-SPAN phone numbers on the screen. We've talked a lot about the Israeli elections and about U.S.-Israeli relations, and we're very pleased that you'll take some calls from our audience. So we'll put the numbers on the screen and go to those questions in just a few minutes. We have had here in the United States many opportunities just since the election to hear Benjamin Netanyahu explain his approach. He has said, for example, that he wants peace with security. He will honor the agreements made by your governments. He welcomes the dialogue with Syria and the Palestinians. Can you explain to people watching then, how will his government, his approach be different from the one that you had?
Yes, in a way. You know, for example, I do believe that we cannot reach peace with Syria without making a territorial compromise. Mr. Netanyahu thinks he can make peace just by offering peace. I do believe it's a little bit over-optimistic, and it won't move, it won't lead to any direction. And I do believe that to make peace with Syria is a real need. I think peace adds to security. It doesn't contradict security. So here you have a clear example. Then with the Palestinians, we have had an agreement and we have to respect it fully. You cannot agree and then ask the other side to agree to change the agreement. So, I mean, I believe that we have to implement all the articles that were written down between the two of us, and I wouldn't change my mind about their validity or their value. You know, I'm very proud, let me say it straightforward, that under our administration, for the first time in Israel, in our history, Israel no longer is the ruler of the Palestinian people. And the Palestinian people are no longer ruled by us. They got their liberty and we got our liberty. And the double liberty means peace and freedom for all of us. This is an irreversible situation. Then we also made peace with the Jordanians. This is a very special peace, because here we decided to build a peace, not just to make a peace. Namely, to take the border between the two of us and convert it into a very large joint venture. And instead the border dividing between us, the border will offer a cooperation for the two nations, economically and otherwise. It's a very special experiment, and I do hope it will succeed. Then finally, we have to work for peace with all the other countries in the Middle East. You know, when you don't have peace, the region is like being in a hospital, full of wounds, of pains, of dangers. And you have to heal the whole situation, all the patients, and offer a new future for our children, for the Arab children, and we can do it.
How important has United States financial aid and diplomatic aid been to the peace process you just described?
For 75 years during the communist reign, the United States was basically engaged to defend democracy, to confront the danger of Bolshevism and communism. Now, once Russia or communism has collapsed, the United States decided to devote its energy and its resources to bring peace to all people in our time. I cannot imagine that a peace process can be conducted without the leadership of the United States, without the leadership of President Clinton. And the Middle East is an important testing ground because the conflict is so large and so complicated, and the United States played a key role in bringing parties together, in paving new roads for peace, in trying new precedents to bring the people at a meeting point.
Shimon Peres is joining us live from Philadelphia later today. He will be accepting the Liberty Medal from Philadelphia. It's been awarded since 1989, and he is the co-winner along with King Hussein of Jordan. Let's take a call for Mr. Peres, Southfield, Michigan. Good morning.
Good morning. Mr. Prime Minister, if I may still address you as so, it is an honor to speak with you. I am an American of Palestinian descent. My background is half Christian, half Muslim, but frankly, most of my friends are Jewish. And I want to thank you for everything that you have done for the peace process. I'm going to have to keep myself from crying right now. But I wish you had won the election. If Yasser Arafat should pass away, what do you think the future of the Palestinian Authority and leadership would be?
Well, first of all, I hope it won't happen. We pray for the health of Arafat. I think he has shown himself as a responsible leader, and I think he's in a good shape. But today, the Palestinian Authority and the agreement between the Palestinians and us is a solid fact, and it will go on beyond any person, beyond any personality. And I must say that the Palestinians do have an impressive group of leaders that can go on with the same destiny they have chosen. And thank you very much for your good wishes. May I say that listening to you, I always remember that the Christians, the Muslims, and the Jews are saying all of us are sons of Abraham. If we are sons of Abraham, time has come that we shall become brothers of the same family.
How long will your visit to the United States be?
I shall be here for another couple of days.
What else is on your agenda?
Well, I shall spend most of the day in Philadelphia. Then I'm going for a day or two to New York to have a good time, to visit some bookshops, to see a good theater, to visit a museum. It will be my first 2 or 3 days that I shall take off just for pleasure.
What kinds of books will you be looking for?
Well, in the way of books, I don't know about kinds. I know there are good books and bad books. It can be fiction and non-fiction. It can be philosophy. It can be history. Really, when it comes to book, it is its value, its depth. And you make an acquaintance with a book as you do with a person. After 10 or 15 pages, you know with whom you have to deal with. And when you have a good book, you really got something of importance. I mean, books are as important as friends, and maybe more so, because all of us are living in very limited circles. Books enables us to run away from them.
Our next question for you comes from Philadelphia. You're on the air, caller.
Hi, I was wondering if Mr. Peres had heard the comment made by the Time correspondent that the Russian press had, in effect, given up its independence 2 months or 6 weeks before the election, and had it been all out for Boris Yeltsin. And I wonder if he agrees with that, and if he thinks that's at all unusual. I personally don't think it is. I think this happens all the time. I think studies, like, for example, when there were riots in American cities, showed that the press, the American press, when a city is faced with a riot, the local press just completely, forgets about objectivity and goes for its own survival. I don't think this is an unusual phenomenon at all, and I wonder if what he thinks about this as far as the Israeli press in the Israeli elections.
Thank you.
I think the Israeli press gave an equal opportunity to the two parties. Surely in editorial, you can see the views or the inclination of different newspapers, But while I think that you can't have a democracy without having a free press, let's not exaggerate. There is a limit to what the press can really introduce or impress the other people. I remember the press, for example, didn't give a chance to President Truman, and yet he won. I still remember that late Dewey came out with the headlines that he has won. So press is important, but its impression has its own limitations.
Would you comment on the decisive victory for Boris Yeltsin in the runoff election there?
I think that judging by the alternatives, this is a good omen. Russia still is facing tremendous problems, and winning the elections just creates an opportunity. It is not yet the solution of the problems. Wherever you look around in Russia, you can see the shortcomings, the maladies, the discontent of the people, the difficulty to adopt themselves to a free world, to a democratic system. It is not a simple proposition. Let's not forget that Russia throughout her history never enjoyed really a democracy, a free government. It is only recently, over the last decade, that Russia is trying to adopt itself to a free society.
Our next question for you, Mr. Perez, is from Palo Alto, California. You're on the air.
Mr. Perez, I'm wanting to express my appreciation to you for your leadership and the distinguished courage that you have displayed over the years, along with Prime Minister Rabin. I think you've done a great deal to bring peace to your region, and I hope that you will continue your efforts. I admire you a great deal, and I wish you the very best.
Thank you very much. You are very kind.
About 3-4 minutes left with you, Mr. Perez. Today, in many newspapers around the country, people are reading a story out of Israel about a demand by Ariel Sharon to take a place on the cabinet of the new government in the role of defense ministry. For people who aren't that familiar with leaders in your country, could you explain who he is, what you think of his demand, and what it will mean for the country if it's accepted?
Well, it's a long story. I can say only nice things about him, but it won't be the full picture. I think that Sharon is a formidable politician. He was a great warrior. He did things that people have appreciated. He did other things that were highly criticized by him. And him joining in the government will clearly add a certain color to the policies of the government. And basically, Mr. Sharon feels that we have to continue, I believe, with the settlements, and that we have really to see first and foremost the security needs and security call. So I do hope that finally he will also support peace.
What will it mean to Israel's adversaries if he takes the critical role of defense minister?
No, he's not taking the defense ministry. I think he's taking the infrastructure ministry, which is a special ministry composed for him. I do believe it may create some administrative problems because we never had this sort of a mixture under one roof in the same ministry, and it may complicate, I believe, a little bit the work of the government.
Next question for you, sir, is from Boca Raton, Florida. Good morning, caller.
Good morning. Firstly, I'd like to say to the former Prime Minister, I greatly admired his work, and I wish more world leaders had his ingenuity and compassion for humanity. My question is thus, where does he see the direction of the Labour Party? And secondly, does he anticipate any power maneuvering in the Labour Party for the next set of elections?
Well, in democracy, you have to take a defeat with the same good faith as you take a victory. When you are victorious, don't lose your head. When you lose, don't lose your mind. You have really to control the situation and understand, and in a democratic system, there are times that you win, there are times that you lose. The thing that you should never lose is your positions, is your directions, is your hopes. A party is not a goal in its own right. It is just an instrument to attain some important goals, to serve some important causes in history. And as a party, you have always to ask yourself, how can I be of best in serving my people? Labor will continue to serve the peace process with full speed and deep conviction wherever we may be. The rest are unimportant maneuvers, because politics is not a distribution of power, but politics should be a collection of strengths to change for the better the destiny of the people, the future of the children. Those are the real goals.
Last question for you, sir, is from Larkspur, Colorado. You're on the air, caller.
Good morning, Mr. Prime Minister, and we are glad to have you here in the United States.
Thank you.
Mr. Prime Minister, there has been an attack on a U.S. Compound in Saudi Arabia. Do you see a connection between the forces that are behind this attack and some of the attacks that are taking place in Israel?
I do. You know, terror became an international menace. It has headquarters in some countries, in some movement. For example, Iran is presiding over a net of terrorists all over the places. And terror can really cause great difficulties and victimize innocent people. We have to maintain and build a real coalition worldwide to really stop this menace and stop the terroristic countries from continuing to spread blood and dangers in many places all over the world.
Where do you see the seeds of a successful building of that coalition between governments?
What do I see, please?
Where do you see the seeds of a successful formation of such a coalition as you've described?
I do believe that President Clinton is now trying to hammer out together this sort of a coalition. It cannot really become important without the leadership of the United States, and I do believe that President Clinton has the will and the capacity to do so. It will save the world from one of its greatest menaces, and it will secure the life of many innocent people.
Mr. Perez, thank you for spending time with C-SPAN this morning on the day you're receiving the Liberty Medal in Philadelphia. We appreciate your time and taking our viewers' questions.
Thank you very much.
Well, Philadelphia is going to be having the speech by Mr. Perez and lots of other festivities today on Independence Day. But one of the things that one always thinks of in Philadelphia, no matter what day of the year it are all of the monuments and sites connected with the earliest days of American democracy. Joining us right now is Joanne Blacoe. She is with the National Park Service. She is a park ranger at the Independence National Historical Site and standing next to a very familiar site this morning. Good morning, Joanne Blacoe. Thanks for being with us.
Good morning. Happy 4th of July.
And same to you. You're next to the Liberty Bell, and would you tell us a little bit about this bell, please?
Well, what most people know about the Liberty Bell is that it's important and that it's cracked. So they assume that it's important because of the crack. And the Liberty Bell is special for me and different from a lot of other historic sites and historic objects because unlike those other things that may be important for a particular day or a particular event or era, this really reflects the whole history of the United States from the very beginning until right this minute. It was purchased for the State House in Philadelphia, and that's better known as Independence Hall today, and that's the building just behind me. Mr. Perez was standing in front of Independence Hall just a few minutes ago, and it was just the regular working bell for the city of Philadelphia. Although it announced things and told for things like the Stamp Act, it was muffled when it was told for the Stamp Act. It pealed when the Stamp Act was repealed, so it had a lot to do with the beginning of the country. What makes this really special is the inscription around the top of the bell. And it's an inscription that's from the Old Testament. It says, "Proclaim liberty throughout all the land unto all the inhabitants thereof." And that is an inscription that comes from the Old Testament, from Leviticus. And it was put on the bell, some people believe, because when this bell was ordered, it was the 50th anniversary of William Penn's Charter of Privileges, which gave Pennsylvanians a great deal of freedom. Pennsylvania was a state that had an awful lot of toleration, more so than other states, in the beginning of the country. And that inscription has really captured the imagination of people. The first people to call this old State House bell the Liberty Bell was an abolitionist group. It was just in the 1830s. This was a bell that was obviously from the building where the Declaration of Independence was adopted, a document that says all men are created equal. And the idea that the inscription says, proclaim liberty throughout all the land unto all the inhabitants thereof, was perfect for the abolitionist cause. So they used it, and they spread their message using this symbol, the Liberty Bell.
Let me just tell our viewers that you can spend about, say, 10 more minutes with us. And if people would like to call with questions about the Liberty Bell or about any of the National Historical Sites there around the same area in Philadelphia, we will welcome your questions or your comments. I know the site gets many visitors. In fact, how many people visit the Liberty Bell and the adjoining sites each year?
We get about 1.5 million people a year.
And what's the most common question about the Liberty Bell itself?
Well, as you'd imagine, the most common question is how the bell cracked. And it's a question that we don't have an answer for. We don't really know. We know that the bell was broken by 1846, after about 90 years of use. And we know that it was broken because the city of Philadelphia tried to repair it. And this sounds a little backwards, but when a bell is broken, it's a very small crack, a very thin crack, as wide as a hairline crack. And the edges of the bell vibrate together, so it sounds very flat. And if you separate those edges, then sometimes you can continue to use the bell, sometimes indefinitely. There are lots of bells that are repaired like this. So this crack was actually widened. If you look very closely at the crack, it looks like a lot of small drill holes, and that's exactly what they are. Unfortunately, the repair didn't work, and the crack extended up, ironically, through the word liberty on Washington's birthday in 1846. So we don't know when it cracked or exactly how. It probably just wore out, but it has been broken since 1846.
Can it ring at all now?
No, not at all, and it hasn't rung since that day. So it's been 150 years that the bell's been silent.
How much peril is it in for its infrastructure? Will it be around as long as the country will be?
It's going to be around for a long time. It's pretty safe. It's pretty stable. Over the years, there have been some attempts to stabilize it. There is a brace underneath that holds the clapper in place. And we do ask people to be very gentle. It's here. It's close. They can see it very closely, but I think it's going to be around for a long time.
May people touch it when they visit the site?
You may touch it if you're very gentle. We don't encourage it because too much touching could damage the bell. We want people to be very respectful of it.
We're going to take a couple calls and then want to hear about some of the other sites immediately in the vicinity, just for those who have not had a chance to visit, to know what they might see if they visit the historic sites in Philadelphia. Our call is from Florence, New Jersey. Good morning.
Yes, good morning. I'd like to ask if that's the original bell, or have it ever been replaced, and also what's the size of the bell in terms of its width and length and so forth and so on. And I have a comment to make that with the former president of Israel praising President Clinton as a good world leader, and I just want to think that the foreign policy for President Clinton has been very effective. Thank you.
Thanks for the call. The questions about the bell.
This is absolutely the original Liberty Bell. This is the one that was made in 1753, and it weighs about a ton. It's, I don't know, not too big, about 3 feet high, but its weight is about a ton.
And can you tell me about the pavilion? How long has that pavilion been there, and what's the thinking in the design of it?
This pavilion has been here since 1976. The Liberty Bell was moved here, the first event of the bicentennial year, on January 1st, 1976. And the idea was that there were going to be so many people who wanted to see the bell that we wanted to make sure that it was very accessible to them, that people could come in, take a look, take their pictures, reflect on the Liberty Bell. And also, another big consideration, and the reason that the bell is made almost entirely of glass, is that it's on display for 24 hours a day. People can come by in the middle of the night, and there is a button outside. You can hear the story of the Liberty Bell, even if you're in between changing planes in Philadelphia.
How far is the pavilion from the, you said Independence Hall itself is right by it. I guess that's the major site of buildings in the area. How far away physically is Independence Hall?
It's just one city block.
And what can people see there?
At Independence Hall?
Yes.
It's the building where the Declaration of Independence was signed, the Constitution was written. There are tours through the building. The building has several other rooms. But Independence Hall isn't the only thing in Philadelphia. There are lots and lots of things. In fact, you should spend several days here because you'd really need it to see all of the things that are in Philadelphia. In fact, next to Independence Hall on either side are buildings that were used by the federal government. Philadelphia was the capital of the United States between 1790 and 1800 while Washington was being built. And Congress Hall is to one side. Old City Hall, which was the old City Hall, and is also where the Supreme Court met, is on the other side. So that was a real government center in the 18th century.
In fact, I have a map from the Philadelphia newspaper published Tuesday of this week that shows the area around, and maybe we can show our audience. Here's the current Liberty Bell Pavilion and Independence Hall right here along Chestnut Street. It's got two other maps next to it suggesting that the Park Service is considering some redoing of the area.
Yes.
What's ahead?
Well, we're in the planning stages right now. There are several plans that have been announced, and the citizens of Philadelphia, citizens of the United States, the National Park Service, the City of Philadelphia, we're all trying to figure out what's the best way to preserve these things and also to allow people to see them very well.
And we'll take a call. I just want to show the audience all three of these maps, if we can pull the camera out, just to show that there are all kinds of plans under consideration for that area around Independence Hall. Next is Hagerstown, Maryland. Good morning, caller.
Good morning. You know, in showing the Liberty Bell, you have to realize that Benjamin Franklin was, very much in the news at this time. And I'm recalling a statement that I read about him saying that people who did not guard their liberty and fight for it, their liberty and freedom, don't deserve it. And, you know, two of the things that I wanted to say while I was here, there are references from the dictionary, for instance, on communism, and after Mr. Perez just talked, I think this is very apropos. It says, communism, the definition of it, is a theory or system of social organization based on the holding of property in common, actual ownership in the hands of the community as a whole or by the state. I don't think many Americans would like having other people own what they work for. Socialism, a theory or a method of social organization and government whereby the citizenry jointly own the means of production and distribution, and the power of administrative control is vested in the state. That is to say, you're back in feudal times. This is my own statement. The state being the king or royalty. And then we have another one, a parasite, an animal which lives on or in a living organism, one who lives on others without making a fitting return. And I have to wonder how many people are actually aware that this country, starting with Waco, where Mr. Clinton's compassion burned up 50 babies, I have to wonder how many people realize that this is exactly what we are in the throes of right now, a communist takeover. So much that I doubt very much whether a free election is going to be allowed in this country.
Caller, thanks very much. I got to move you along because our time with Joanne Blacoe is short. How often do you find that people become very reflective about some basic principles of American government and democracy by visiting your sites there?
It happens frequently, and it's very nice to see. It comes at times when you don't expect it. I was here one day about 10 years ago in the fall, and it was very quiet. There were just a few visitors, and a man and his sort of middle-aged son walked into the Bell, and they were very quiet and seemed to want to have some reflective time with the Liberty Bell. And finally, the son came over and sort of talked to me on the side, and he said, my father was born in Hungary, and he asked me to bring him here today because on this day 30 years ago, Russian tanks rolled into the town in which he was born. And he wanted me to bring him here today to remind him how proud he is to now live in a country where there's liberty. And stories like that, I frankly can't tell them all exactly the way that they happen because I sort of well up. But it does happen frequently, and it comes at times that you just don't expect it, and you really realize the power that these kinds of symbols have for all kinds of people.
We've met lots of rangers along the years as we've visited different historic sites and find that many of them have a great deal of zeal for the particular sites to which they are assigned, spend a lot of time studying about it. What's your own background? How'd you get interested in this? How long have you been at the park, and how much studying did you do about the sites there?
Lots of studying, lots and lots, and it never ends. I was always interested in history. I grew up just outside of the city of Philadelphia, and when I realized that this was a national park, I knew what I wanted to do, and I've been here almost since college, for a long time.
Next question for you is from Northville, Michigan. Caller, you're on the air. Good morning. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, this is Fred Galley in Northville. I have 3 short questions. When was the bell cast, by whom, and what is the composition of the metal?
The metal is called bell metal, and it's a combination of copper and tin. And it was cast in 1753 by 2 founders, John Pass and John Stowe, who were from Philadelphia. They used metal that was from a bell that came from England, and very much in the same way that the creation of the United States was a combination of things that were here in North America and things that were from other places. They used that metal to make their new bell. And when this bell was made, the Speaker of the Pennsylvania Assembly seemed very proud that it was made here. He made a comment that it was the best bell for aught he knew in all of North America. So he was very proud that it was made here in Philadelphia.
Next question's from Phoenix. Good morning.
Yeah, my obvious question is, why don't you fix the bell? You just put some welding in there. We must have the technology to fix that. And let me just make one political paragraph. If you can't trust Bill Clinton on the simplest things, the issues are irrelevant. Everybody says, oh, we don't care about his character. We only care about the issues. If he lies to you about everything from when the sun comes up to when the sun goes down, how can you trust him on what he says about Medicare?
Okay, wait, before you go, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
You called in about fixing the bell. The crack has become sort of the symbol of the whole thing. Why would you want it fixed?
Well, the bell doesn't work. Like our government, the bell doesn't work. I mean, it's just my natural inclination is to fix the bell so that it rings. Wouldn't it be great on the year 2001 to ring the Liberty Bell?
Joanne Blacoe.
Well, there have been many suggestions over the years to repair the Liberty Bell. It is actually more famous now that it's broken as a symbol than it ever was when it was a working bell. And I'm really not sure what kind of tone you would get anyway. Even when it was a working bell, some of the people in Philadelphia complained that the sound maybe wasn't the best. And it is really, as you said, it sort of reflects, U.S. history. And the fact that it is cracked, and liberty is not perfect. The United States is not perfect. And so here is our bell. It's silent, and it's just like liberty, not a perfect thing, and something that we need to take care of and preserve.
Joanne Blacoe, Park Ranger at the Independence National Historical Site, a native of the Philadelphia area. Thanks very much for giving C-SPAN viewers a special tour of the Liberty Bell this morning on Independence Day.
Enjoy the 4th of July.
Thank you.
You're watching C-SPAN's Washington Journal. Coming up, today's newspaper roundtable. Joining us for the next hour to review this morning's headlines, Congressman Thomas Davis, a Republican from Virginia, and Christopher Hitchens, contributing editor to Vanity Fair. After that, at about 9:10 Eastern Time, a preview of the Libertarian Party convention. It gets underway today in Washington. Our guest, David Nolan, founder of the Libertarian Party. But first, a look at a recent stop of one of the C-SPAN school buses.
The Teapot Dome affair was, in essence, the biggest scandal, biggest presidential scandal up to its time, from 1921 to about 1924. The story was uncovered, actually I should say something a little bit about the name Teapot Dome, because it gets its name from the petroleum reserve, the Naval Petroleum Reserve, that was established in 1915 about 35 miles north of Casper, Wyoming. And the reserve was set up next to a creek known as Teapot Creek that got its name from a rock known as Teapot Rock. And the reserve was in essence to be kept there so that the Navy would have a dependable source of petroleum in case there was a war. And there were a lot of independent oil men in Wyoming that looked on that field with very anxious eyes, because they felt that that if that particular oil field were to be leased by the federal government, they would be the ones who should probably get the lease. And then one day in the summer of 1921, they started noticing trucks coming in to that field, and by the end of the year, there was activity going on there. There was oil drilling activity going on there, and as many of these people started asking Senator John B. Kendrick of Wyoming, the Wyoming senator from Sheridan, it was just a few miles to the north of the Teapot Dome area, what in the world is going on? Has the federal government decided to open up the Teapot Dome Reserve to drilling? And Kendrick, of course, didn't know anything about it, and he started asking around and mentioned this to other members of the Senate, and then the U.S. Senate started an investigation, and the investigation then started revealing some of the illegal activities that had been done to lease this particular oil field to a private oil company, Mammoth Oil Company, run by Harry Sinclair. It was a big enough scandal that it affected the 1924 presidential election, and it did so in a rather unusual way. Warren Harding, it was his administration during which most of this illegal activity was going on. One would have expected, of course, that it would have spelled trouble for Harding's party, for the Republicans, but Harding, either through good luck or bad luck, however way you want to look at it, died the 2nd of August 1923, about the time that the scandal was being uncovered. And by early 1924, Calvin Coolidge, of course, was president. He had been Harding's vice president, and he took a very careful look at all of this matter. He apparently was not involved in any of the activities. He was able to steer pretty clear of any kind of involvement. During his campaign, he pretty much steered clear of the scandal by getting rid of some of the figures that were implicated. Edwin Denby, for example, the Navy Secretary, Coolidge asked for and received his resignation, and then the Attorney General, who also had been a Harding crony, was asked to resign by Coolidge, and Coolidge was able to come out of it fairly well. The interesting part is that the Democratic frontrunner in January of 1924, William Gibbs McAdoo, the former Treasury Secretary in the Wilson administration and the son-in-law of Woodrow Wilson, was severely damaged by the Teapot Dome scandal. When he appeared before a U.S. Senate committee in early 1924, he had to admit to his representation of the fellow who had been implicated in giving the bribes, and it very seriously affected his nomination, to the point where by summer, when the Democratic National Convention was held, he and Al Smith were pretty much tied for the nomination, and out of desperation, the Democratic Party had to turn to a corporate lawyer by the name of John W. Davis to nominate for president in '24. It certainly eliminated McAdoo's chances for the presidency, or for the nomination in '24, and it's anybody's guess what the outcome would have been had Coolidge run against McAdoo.
Today, as one C-SPAN school bus heads to Spokane, Washington, the other bus visits Philadelphia for the national bell ringing at Liberty Bell Pavilion.
C-SPAN's Washington Journal continues.
And we're back to the newspapers on this 4th of July. We'll begin our discussion this morning with Congressman Tom Davis of Virginia, who's been here early reading the papers.
Right.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Happy holiday to you.
Thank you.
What's the first story you want to talk about?
Well, I think the biggest story of the day is Yeltsin's reelected as president. That seems to be the headline in all of the papers, from New York Times, Baltimore Sun, Washington Times, Washington Post, straight on. And I think that's good for us, that Yeltsin. We're dealing now with a known commodity. Return to communism there, I think, raised all kinds of issues for this country in terms of what we do vis-a-vis that section of the world, NATO, and everything else. So we have a little bit of continuity there, and it was a fairly decisive win.
So you think the question's settled?
For the time being, it is. Now, Yeltsin's health and those issues aren't settled, but I think the election is settled at this point. It appears to be. Moscow's calm today. It was a decisive win.
Christopher Hitchens, you watch foreign policy issues. What do you think about the election results there?
Well, if there was such a thing as the international establishment, which I sometimes think there must be, which has a sort of collective mind, then it must be very happy today, because it had staked pretty much everything on this victory. Everyone from Helmut Kohl to Strobe Talbot, had really invested everything in Yeltsin. They'd covered up for him on Chechnya. They'd made him huge unsecured loans. They'd lied about the state of his health and all the rest of it. They must be fantastically relieved, but I don't feel very much more secure or reassured myself. Obviously, the defeat of the Stalinists is a good thing, and I think this is also their last chance. If they couldn't come back this time, they'll never be able to do it again. But we have a drunken, lying murderer, actually. I mean, he has committed mass murder in Chechnya and been covered up for in the Kremlin. And there's someone whose attitudes are not democratic, whose past is not democratic, whose mentality is not democratic. And we've painted ourselves into the same corner as him. What I was touched to see, and by the way, happy Independence Day and congratulations and well done. We still have to get rid of the descendants of George III in my home country, but we're working on it, believe me. I was very interested to see that in Russia they have a ballot line that says none of the above. You can fill that in. And if enough people had done it, they'd have had to cancel, and anyone could have run for president. Anyway, I was pleased to see 5% of the Russians did take that option, and I wish it was a ballot line available in all democratic countries.
Among all the stories we had to choose from on this 4th of July, would you have put that first on the list in importance?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think it's not just important in itself for Russia, which is important in itself, but it's a domestic story. I mean, the United States political establishment had made a huge investment in this election, and if it had gone the other way, it would have had amazing domestic repercussions. So yeah, I mean, it deserves its place.
Two special guests at the table on this holiday who have been in here in shirt sleeves today, honoring the holiday, and the relaxed mood at the table this morning. They've been reading the morning newspapers, as we always do here on C-SPAN, and as you know, this is a roundtable discussion that involves you. We'll put the phone lines on the table, rather, the phone lines on the screen, and get a few more items on the table before we take your calls. This morning, we are splitting the lines a little bit differently, and that is to give people who support Senator Dole and those who support President Clinton an opportunity to sound off, so we can have time for both sides of the table this morning. And so we've split them differently, and we ask your help in staying with that as you phone in today, and it gives us a chance to get some mix of opinions here. Congressman Davis, back to you for another article.
Okay, well, I think the second area that I would look at is on the whole Filegate issues with Whitewater and everything else. The Baltimore Sun has Washington struggles make few waves in Pennsylvania.
Actually, that story is Jack Germond filing from Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, saying that he can't find people that are paying attention to what's happening.
Well, they have a great quote here. I just hustle windows. I don't worry about politics or that foolishness in Washington. It's always been my view that most people don't think about politics except for a short time. That's why the 30-second spot was born, because people can't get up from the couch, they can't go get something out of the refrigerator, and they think they just kind of absorb it through osmosis. And that's why the political advertising goes for those short spots, because there is a segment in the electorate that frankly doesn't see politics affecting their everyday life, and that is how political leaders get their message across.
Amazing to have that quote on the front page, though. That really doesn't belong on the front page. I mean, for Jack Germond to go out and find someone who isn't interested is not news. In fact, I would say that for Jack Germond to go out and find someone who isn't interested in politics is the absolute definition of a non-story.
But there's a series of stories. Here's one. File Aid did campaign pranks in '92. Let me just, without pulling them all up, The Post today on A4 says witnesses described 1990 Clinton meeting and they were talking about the money that was changing hands for highway appointments. That's the Whitewater trial. Washington Times has file probe to include questionnaire charges about questionnaires, IRS file on one of the ushers at the White House who was fired. The front page, well, the Philadelphia Inquirer has uproar over FBI files, highlights Clinton White House early chaos. The Washington Times has the Ken Starr has hatched a probe of Marcisa. New York Post says Livingston took a 40% pay hike while others took pay cuts. And they quote the Hill usher, the White House usher is saying the Hill fired me after getting tax records. And so it's New York Times, I think, the only paper that doesn't mention it, which I think has probably been the paper that probably most pro-Clinton of any paper. This is an issue that won't go away. This is an issue that I think they're going to have to, is not going off the front pages.
An issue? What issue specifically?
The whole Watergate, Whitewater and the Filegate issues, FBI files, document, Travelgate. It kind of all fits together in a maze, and as you read these papers, there are a series of stories in every major paper in the country.
Christopher Hitchens, would you like to comment on that or bring a new topic to the table?
Well, I'd say that I disagree with Jack Jamond, and it's a common mantra among liberal writers in Washington that this story has no legs, people don't care, and so on, as if that was the test. I think actually it's become increasingly well understood that, and at, so to speak, taxi driver or saloon bar level, at both of which I like to think I spend a lot of time, testing the temperature of the nation.
Washington taxis mostly?
Washington taxis, no, New York taxis, taxis, street corners, bars, anyway, rubbing shoulders in general. The people do sort of roughly know now that the Clintons ran a sort of banana republic operation in Arkansas. They were willing to forgive that at the time, and did. But they're a bit worried that some of those practices appear to have been brought to Washington. And yes, I think it will tell, and probably is already telling, in the only very crude and, I think, overrated measurement we have, which is the opinion polls. Yeah, I do have another nomination. I noticed when you were talking to Mr. Perez just before we came on that you probably hadn't got to page A30 of the Post in the final edition, but General Sharon now does have a cabinet post.
And it is which?
And it's been specially created for him. It's Ministry of Infrastructure.
I listened to him last night on Larry King Live. Mr. Netanyahu had not yet decided at 9 o'clock last night.
Well, his coalition partner, David Levy, threatened to resign if a special post was not created for Sharon. And it's been drawn from many other ministries, including energy, roads, and so on. It's a powerful ministry. It's a super ministry. Now, the reason I notice it is that we also have today the War Crimes Tribunal hearings in The Hague, and they've placed General Ratko Mladic, the chief of staff of the illegal Serbian state, physically at the site of the massacre in Srebrenica. And, sorry, am I... No, okay.
Please continue.
Okay.
I'm just getting ready to take a call, and I wasn't sure which of the lines it was on.
Sorry, it looked as if there'd been a meltdown or something. Or I thought perhaps I was boring you. Anyway, where was I? They've placed General Mladic physically at the site of the mass murder of civilians in Srebrenica. Now, a few years ago, an Israeli commission, the Kahana Commission, found General Sharon complicit, at any rate, in a not dissimilar massacre. And that stain, it seems to me, should disqualify him from having a super ministry created for him. And I think the United States government, which basically is the paymaster of the Israeli government, should make its views known about this appointment. I think it's an incredibly bad start for the Netanyahu regime.
Let me go back to domestic politics. Both of you have been critical of the Clinton administration and for the various stories from Whitewater to Filegate. All this week we've been watching the tobacco story from the campaign trail.
I had that on, by the way, for my third story.
What's your assessment of what it all means?
I think it's a counterattack right now, coming back at Senator Dole. I think Senator Dole
Counterattack by whom?
Well, basically, I think it's moved from the White House, and I think the media has picked up on it because it's an interesting story. I think also that Senator Dole overreacted in his meeting with Katie Couric on the air, which he stood up and lashed out, and there's several articles today talking about the old Bob Dole, the hatchet man again. He's got to stay up, he's got to stay positive in these areas, and so I think this is fraught with some landmines for Senator Dole.
Here's Howard Kurtz and David Broder in tobacco flare-up, echoes of the old Dole. Contentions encounter with TV Co says candidates' allies uneasy. What do you make of this week's press for him?
I think the Couric thing's a complete distraction, and I always thought that for Dole to say something as mild to Bush as "stop lying about my record," for that to be considered a terrible, fierce, dark side thing to say, always baffled me. Only people who have a really banal attitude to politics could say that that was really combative. The issue in this Couric row is not whether she was mean to him or indeed he was rude to her, because we should all be grown up enough, you know, to not bother with that. The issue is, does Senator Dole say things that he's paid to say by campaign donors? And the answer is yes, he does. So I think it's a very bad day for him. I mean, he also says things that he knows not to be true, that are self-evidently untrue, and I speak as a confirmed smoker and smokers' rights person. I consider myself also to be, to that extent, addicted to nicotine. It's idle and childish to maintain otherwise. The other way it's a bad day for Dole is this incredibly ill-advised photograph he's had taken of himself. It appears in different versions with Ronald Reagan, who, though I personally don't think he was mentally or physically competent to be president at the time, certainly is no longer mentally or physically competent. And it shows. And it just reminds people that Dole is older now than Reagan was when he first ran. And I think that, well, it's something he might not have wanted to play up so much.
The campaign is calling this a red letter day, a banner day to be able to visit with President Reagan.
I think President Reagan is still very well remembered. It was a time in Washington where you had no hint of corruption, basically, around the president, personally.
Yeah. That's really not at all
the economy was moving very well in those days. There was values. President Reagan left with some very, very good numbers. California is a critical state in this election where the Republicans have been counted out, and I think for that reason it's a good day.
Under President Reagan, illegal money was raised from drugs and from the sale of illegal weapons and the trading in human lives to conduct an illegal, unconstitutional foreign policy for a start. And Reagan was president of that secret government as well as of the legal government. He was a regular, habitual liar, and as for the economy, we're still living with his deficit.
Well, it was actually
a
congressional deficit by and large.
Here's another photograph from that visit, and we'll look at it as we go to your calls. First is from College Park, Maryland. Good morning.
Good morning. Yeah, thank you, C-SPAN, and I do appreciate you, and I do watch you an awful lot to get an alternative voice on the news. The other thing is that I happen to be, which I wasn't going to say anything, I happen to be a Reagan Democrat. So I do think that President Reagan was a very valuable person and a very great president.
Who will you be supporting this year?
Dole, of course. The thing is that really bothers me, though, with our president that we have at the present time is how can we trust our peace treaties, some of these other things, if we can't trust a person in their private life, which we don't have to see, but which we happen to have seen, how can we trust him on major things when, you know, I don't understand how we say, oh, it doesn't matter. It does matter. If I do something in my private life that is not right, I don't feel I can go out and represent myself as somebody else around the corner.
Okay, let me ask you, you said obviously as a Reagan Democrat you're going to be supporting Dole. Explain that.
Because I did change parties after this last election because I just didn't feel that I was any longer wanted in the Democratic Party.
So you're a Reagan Republican, in fact?
Yes, now.
Well, okay. It's just not the way you started.
It's a Dole Republican now. But
yeah, in fact, a Dole Republican. Well, you just began by saying you were a Reagan Democrat.
Well, I think...
Or are.
Well,
anyway, there's another thing you seem to assume that we'll understand from what you say, but you haven't made it very clear. What leader, what private life?
Talking about the president we have at the present time.
Right.
If we can't trust a person to be faithful and true to his wife, his own morals, if he has any, or whatever, how can we trust him to be true to us as an American people when he's doing other things?
Well, I think the public has always had a differentiation between somebody's private life and how they act in public. And it's both for representatives in Congress, we've had members who've been reprimanded on the floor for bad personal behavior who've gone on and given high marks by their constituencies. And a number of presidents have shown infidelity in the past. Many of them have learned about after their time in office, but it hasn't seemed to affect their public posture.
Since we're speaking on the 4th of July, one might mention, I mean, for example, and since you're from Virginia, Congressman, so take an example at random. Thomas Jefferson appears to have had a very spotty private life, to have owned slaves, even though he was opposed in principle to slavery. So the question is, does his ownership of slaves discredit his opposition to slavery? The answer is no, it doesn't discredit his opposition to it. It just shows that the relationship between the private and public life is rather complicated. It is complicated.
And voters are pretty good at sorting those out. The difficulty becomes when that private life starts affecting the public decisions. Yeah. And then it becomes overlapping and can in fact become fatal. They have a saying in boxing, you beat the body and the head will go. That's what we may be seeing in the Whitewater episode with the coupled with Filegate and all of these other items. It hasn't accumulated to a critical mass yet where it has affected the relative standing. It's just been on the margins, but the potential, I think, is still there.
I'd never heard that expression before. It's a disgusting expression, isn't it?
It's a boxing expression. It's a guy thing.
Anyway, I'm sure that if it was President Clinton who was on his second marriage and Senator Dole who was on his first, that wouldn't make any difference to you at all, would it, ma'am? Family values as you are. Oh, well, to all the other family values types out there, a point to ponder on this, your Independence Day.
Little Rock, California. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Mr. Hitchens. It's not very often I agree with you, but on Yeltsin I do. Okay. However, I have several things I'd like to say. So, Susan, please give me a chance.
Well, only thing is, make it brief, because everybody wants to get through.
Did you say Little Rock, California?
Yeah.
I didn't know there was a Little Rock.
I want to say this. If the United States court system acted in the manner of which the Senate acted, that it took them 4 long years to investigate Watergate, and all they could come up with was a bunch of innuendos. Now, if it took a court 4 years to solve a case, I don't know where we'd all be. They have put him on a cross and crucified him. This president, when we have a national disaster, he's right on it. California, the earthquake, the freeways are up and running in 6 months. The man did everything he could. That Whitewater thing happened years ago. They said they'd crucify him, and they did.
Who's they?
Senator Dole and all the rest of the Republicans said they weren't going to make his presidency easy. And they haven't made it easy. But let me tell you something. They dropped the Watergate, or the Whitewater, and it's not going unnoticed to the American public that they dropped it one day because the next day they had Filegate. That's the only reason they dropped that Whitewater.
Okay, last comment from you, please.
Last comment is I think leave him alone. He hasn't done anything so terrible. I've heard him called maniacal liar and everything else. And yet, what has he done in his presidency that would warrant you all calling him such bad names? How can he wake up every morning and do the job he's doing when he's got so many enemies out there?
Okay, thank you for your call from Little Rock, California. Mr. Davis?
Well, he certainly has a friend in Little Rock, California. The Whitewater probe in the Senate ended because it had a time period put on by the Senate. It was limited by the Democrats, who would only agree to extend the probe to a certain time. I'm sure that if Senator D'Amato and the Republicans had their say, this would still be going on, and they wouldn't have made their report at the time they did. But once again, the caller makes a differentiation between public policy issues and the others, and there's always a rally around the president among supporters at a time like this when there's a piling on. I would just add, with the whole Filegate episode, White House clearly made some mistakes. They're not even sure of the depth of those mistakes, and they've been a little bit too quick on the trigger in terms of covering this up with their rapid response. And a number of the rapid responses they have made to this have not been borne out by the facts. They've had to revise their story. Media then smells something, and I think that is why you're seeing piling on in this case. It's been mistakes from the White House. Whether this ends up dying a slow death or it goes away quickly, I think is going to depend on how they handle it from here and how the probe goes. But they've created their own mess in this particular case.
Anything on this?
Only one comment, which is it does annoy me when people say that it's somehow the fault of the investigators that the thing has been dragged out. I mean, it isn't because of the curiosity of journalists or congressmen that there have been tremendous outbreaks of amnesia in and around the White House and its defenders, that documents that couldn't be found suddenly turn up at the last available minute and so forth. That's what leads to delay. And for those who think that there's nothing in that, to blame the delay on the investigation just seems to me to be a double dose of hypocrisy.
Chris, can I just add one thing, Chris? You were here on this show, Chris, when Jack Quinn called in and they exerted executive privilege over a number of documents that delayed us getting these documents by a month. The White House has stonewalled these investigations every chance that they have had, and it's pulling teeth getting them out. And it was only when the contempt citation was voted out of the committee and was going to be voted out of the House floor that documents were at that point released, and they have led to more and more inquiry. And they're going to be more. I think if they could have been forthcoming all at one time, this could have been over a long time ago.
Albuquerque is next. You're on the air. Good morning.
Yeah, Susan.
Yes, sir.
I'm a C-SPAN junkie, have been since I retired 5 years ago. And I would like to comment on what isn't in our local paper, the Albuquerque Journal. I'll find this in a Republican publication, Rising Tide, and it says that this Haley Barbour, Clinton vetoed the platform he ran on in 91 rather, and is running on it again. Now that's chutzpah. I'd like your comment, please.
Well, does it give a couple specifics of what he vetoed from the platform?
Well, he vetoed welfare reform, which is one of the things he ran on. Medicare reform, he ran on that.
Okay, thanks very much. Christopher Hitchens, we'll start with you.
It's interesting. I didn't know Haley Barbour had said that, but I know that a lot of Dole's advisors go into orbit when he says, as he did recently in Delaware and has said on other occasions too, that if you vote for Dole, you'll get the program that Clinton promised you last time. The reason his staff don't like him saying that is it more or less gives the game away. If Clinton was a Reagan Democrat or a Falwell Democrat or a Falwell Republican or a Reagan Republican, there would be something for Dole to run on. But to have two moderate Republicans running makes it boring for us and exasperating, I think, for Dole.
Two moderate Republicans. That's essentially where you see them both falling on the political scale.
Yeah, Clinton's original politics. There's a lot of argument about this. I'll tell you where I come out on it, though you haven't yet asked me. A lot of people say, well, Clinton's a secret liberal. If he got a second term, he would, all his old leftism would show and so forth. The alternative to that is to argue, which is what I would argue, that he was always trying to move the Democratic Party to the right, ever since he began his political career, that he ran from the right. In many cases, he ran against Bush from the right, and that there is no secret or hidden liberalism or leftism in his agenda. And that's really why the GOP is punching air in this campaign and can't land a glove on him.
Well, Susan, let me just say that I think that having a Democratic Congress certainly pulled him to the left. And instead of the middle-class tax cut that he promised, they ended up with tax increases and going after deficit reduction in a way that maybe the president wouldn't have wanted to if he had a different Congress to deal with. Now that there's a Republican Congress, the president has moved toward the middle, and Congress has frankly given him some room to do that. But in terms of his actual actions, whether it's welfare reform, balanced budget, or whatever, the rhetoric still far outstrips his actions. And I think that's going to be a huge campaign issue as we move forward, that the president can talk one way, is rhetorically very effusive and very good in talking the moderate line, but when it comes down to actual issues, what has he produced? That's what campaigns are all about. And I think Haley Barbour is sounding one of the themes we'll be hearing in the fall, that he talks one way and governs the other. And the voters so far are not convinced that's the case.
Monday through Friday on this program, we talk to a young person who will be voting for the first time in the 1996 election. Many of them have been participants and winners in C-SPAN's First Vote College Scholarship Program. This is an entry from Peter Garcia of Miami, Florida. He wrote a poem and did a sketch. And if you'll indulge me for a minute, I'll show you on the screen. I'll read you just a little bit of his poem. It went so fast, tender young years, now the law calls me Mr., a child, a man who must now perform his duty, another choice. Just one more ordinary decision. Yet is it so very simple? Do I now carry fate upon my shoulders? Do I choose Democrat, Republican? There is always independent, just one more simple choice. Goes on to suggest that it's not so simple after all. And Peter Garcia is on the line with us right now. Good morning, Mr. Garcia.
Good morning.
I'm wondering how you feel your choice is evolving since you wrote this, which was much earlier in the year.
Well, when I first wrote it, it was really, I was not as really politically aware as I say myself now, and even now, I still have a long way to go as a future American voter. And I've been reading things up, and I've looked up different positions. Some things disturb me about Dole running for president. Some of the things he said, and what I saw this morning in the Miami Herald, he said that he could be another Reagan. And he went on to cite some of the things such as the tax cuts, strong defense, and other things. One of the things that strikes me, just recently graduating from high school, taking an American government class, where our Constitution is a highly evolving document, and yet here he is citing someone from the Cold War. I'm not trying, now please don't think I'm trying to completely discredit President Reagan. What I'm just trying to say is that...
I wouldn't mind if you were.
I think if it hadn't been for President Reagan, we may still be in the Cold War.
Had you thought that you were going to support Senator Dole?
Actually, no. Actually, no. And part of the reason, I guess, maybe you could say it's a bit selfish. Something else that I have seen was that Mr. Clinton, President Clinton, is proposing tax credits to help pay for college, whereas in many cases I've heard not only from my own state government but also from Republicans that they want to make it more expensive for students to get an education.
Well, hold on just a second.
That is just absolute bunk and rhetoric in terms of making it more expensive. We've expended Pell Grants, and there are more student loans available today than ever before. The issue has been whether it is a direct loan program the government directly does or whether it's going to be third party, which is the way most of us took our college loans, and is, I think, proved probably more efficient and has put more capital in the marketplace. Let me also add that the President's tax credit for students is something Republicans don't oppose, and it was only after the Republican Congress came up with its own set of tax cuts that the President embraced this. He had 2 years as President with his own Congress in there, and this was never even proposed at that time. So there's a lot of rhetoric going on in these areas. I would think, as a young person, that I would be concerned about that deficit and what opportunities that's going to offer me in the future, because with almost 20 cents of every tax dollar now going for interest on the national debt, and that's slated to rise, it makes it much more difficult for our younger generation coming up. And to me, that would be the overriding issue. What's going to be left for you, the way we continue the deficit in federal spending at this point?
Peter Garcia, what do you think?
Yeah, what do you think?
Well, granted, if it does continue the way it's going and it does increase, you're right, there won't be much left at all.
Mr. Garcia, by the way, you're young yet, but you'll soon get the knack of it. You have to watch when congressmen like Mr. Davis say what a great man Ronald Reagan was, and how sweet his memory is, and how fragrant in our nostrils is the recollection of him, and then to tell you that we're still paying 20 cents on the dollar in national debt, as if the two things were completely unconnected. Keep an eye on things like that. You'll learn a lot.
Oh, yes, like I said, I wasn't, I'm not trying to destroy the memory of President Reagan.
Well, I wish you were. I certainly am. But by the way, the quote you have from Senator Dole on this is nearly right, but not quite. What Senator Dole actually said was, "I'll be Ronald Reagan if that's what you want." That's what he said to his listeners. In other words, tell me what you wish I'd say, and I'll say it. Another great feature of modern campaigning.
Peter Garcia, lots of people your age don't pay attention. What has gotten you interested? Why are you following this more closely all the time?
Well, everybody has their own dreams. Me personally, just from some of my own experience, at one time and possibly still now, I've always thought about maybe even one day running for president.
Great. Well, I hope you keep your dreams. It's possible. The great thing about this country is that anybody can grow up and be president with a little luck and a lot of hard work, and I hope you pursue your dreams. At a minimum, maybe you'll be led into some kind of government service. I don't think there's a higher calling.
How will you start to pursue this? What's next for you?
Well, after my first semester over at Florida State University, I'm looking at possible internship with a lobbyist group in Tallahassee, and then hopefully from there, just maybe possibly build contacts, just get a feel and understand an even better understanding of government. Because really, the only way you ever really understand something is by being a part of it. That's how I feel.
Okay, thanks very much.
Good luck.
Congratulations on
Good luck.
your award with us, and good luck in your college career.
Thank you very much. Happy 4th of July.
Thank you, sir. Peter Garcia of Miami joining us this morning from nearby in Hialeah, Florida. Go back to telephone calls. Next is Reston, Virginia. Good morning.
Good morning, and a happy Independence Day to everyone there.
Good morning.
Couple of things. First off, I'm solidly in the president's corner. I get so tired of hearing all the venom spewed from the right, and I guess we get out-called on C-SPAN about 5-1. I think I heard Brian say one day, so I'm glad you have the two lines set up so we can get some equal representation here. A number of things. The press and the Republicans were all set to crucify the president once again if we lost Russia to the communists. Well, now that the communists have been defeated, I'm wondering if the press is going to praise the administration for doing a lot to further the reforms, albeit tentative reforms going on in that country. I can hardly wait to see the headlines tomorrow to see how well the administration did in promoting that. But the story I'm interested in now is a letter that's in the current issue of Mother Jones magazine, and it says Dole's Real War Record. And if you give me a second, I'll read it to you. It says the press has missed the story of how Bob Dole deliberately avoided combat service in World War II until weeks before the end of the war. The Dole homepage on the World Wide Web says, quote, in 1942, at the age of 19, Bob Dole answered the call to serve his country by joining the Army to fight World War II. He became a second lieutenant in the Army's 10th Mountain Division, and in the spring of 1943 found himself in the hills of Italy fighting the Nazi Germans, end quote. In December of 1942, Bob Dole signed up for the Army Reserve, a maneuver that allowed him to complete his sophomore year at the University of Kansas.
That is exactly from his homepage, a maneuver that allowed him? Or is that from the article?
That was the end quote at the end of Nazi Germans. Then
right.
the writer goes on. It says, in December of 1942, Bob Dole signed up for the Army Reserve, a maneuver that allowed him to complete his sophomore year at the University of Kansas.
Okay. Now, we're running out of time, so what's the end point of all this?
Well, the wind-up is that he didn't get into the war until the end, about 16 days before Hitler and Eva Braun killed themselves, and it's a shame he got wounded. But he's pitching himself as he started out at 18. And this story is written by Peter G. Weinberg of this letter, former Corporal 503rd Parachute Combat Team, Stamford, Connecticut. So if you want to talk about character and honor, I think the Marlboro man himself, Mr. Dole, has a lot to account for. And I just get tired of the president being constantly hammered by the right wing. I think he's got more character in his baby finger than Mr. Dole has.
All right, sir. Thanks, Reston, Virginia.
First of all, let me say on the Russian situation, I supported the president on that. I think he was right. I think he can bask in the glow of a Yeltsin win. John Kennedy was asked how he became a war hero. And with PT 109, he said it was easy. He said the enemy sank my boat. I think in this particular case, you're not going to be able to take away from Senator Dole the fact that he had those injuries. He did serve in that, and I don't see that as a very good avenue for exploration. Maybe somebody in the media will try to do that, but I think that's probably unassailable.
I don't consider myself a great friend of the right wing either, I'm bound to say, but it isn't me, but President Clinton, who's hired Dick Morris, who used to advise Senator Helms, to be his campaign director. So if you don't like the right, there's lots of room for you to express your doubts and misgivings. It seemed to be one of those calls that makes you realize how partisanship and bipartisanship in combination sort of rot the brain. Obviously, the Clinton policy on Russia is the Bush-Baker policy, and the Dole policy, and the policy of the American establishment. There wasn't an inch of difference between any party leader on it, and nothing, there would have been no recrimination of that sort if Mr. Yeltsin hadn't pulled it off, so I don't accept the grammar of the question. I'm prepared to believe that Senator Dole may have claimed to have been more enthusiastic about the Second World War than he really was, but I don't think you can possibly take away from him the fact that he very nearly lost his arm and his life, and very nearly bled to death. I've been to the village in the Apennines where he got hit and looked around. There was terrible terrain to be fighting in. You can't take that away from him. On the other hand, he did say, and as far as I know is never retracted saying, in a very considered statement made in reply to Vice President Mondale in a high-level debate, that he regards the Second World War as a Democrat war. And he made no secret of the fact that that, in his mind, was a pejorative. In other words, that it wasn't worth fighting and that it was a partisan war. Now, that does seem to me to take away from the credit he otherwise claims for having fought bravely against fascism.
Chris, the quote was actually Democratic wars. It included World War I.
Democrat wars.
Oh, yeah, but it included World War I and World War II. And
for one thing, he blamed all the wars fought in this century by the United States on the Democratic Party, which he calls the Democrat Party. Vietnam I'd give him on that. But the Second World War, well, he's still stuck with saying it's a Democrat war, and to that extent, something not worth fighting in. Now, he has to live with that. I don't see why we have to live with him for it.
Just a lighter side for a moment. You've been very careful several times this morning to wish us a happy Independence Day. I might explain to our audience that you were born in the UK.
And therefore can't run for president. I was just thinking about it when Mr. Garcia was talking. Neither can Henry Kissinger. I mean, no one who wasn't born here can run. But it makes me sad.
You've been here 15 years now?
14 years next week.
Any sense that there might be some creeping Americanism at this point?
Yeah. Well, since I first came on C-SPAN, I've become the father of 3 Americans, for one thing.
They can become
How
president.
about that? They can all become president.
Just a small item in the Post this morning from your homeland. This on the Names and Faces column. Royalty is only an admission fee away. Buckingham Palace, Queen Elizabeth's residence in London, will stay open every summer for paying visitors from this point on. Last year, more than 400,000 people trooped through the palace, generating more than $4.6 million. What does the Queen want with all this money?
Oh, these Hanoverians just don't know when to quit. But if that wasn't so, we wouldn't all be here celebrating the 4th of July.
Next is New Orleans. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm very nervous. This is the first time I've ever been able to get in. And I wanted to speak with Congressman Davis about Senator Dole with Katie Couric. I watched that. Senator Dole said the right thing. I don't know why you're saying something completely different about him. He said that he didn't want the FDA to take over the tobacco, to treat it as a drug. Excuse me.
Well, I'm not quarreling with that. Actually, I was looking at the news interpretations where he said something to her about the liberals in the media and tried to turn it as an attack by the media on there.
Well, she was getting very rude. And Mr. Hitchens, you can't say anything about President Reagan. The Congress holds the purses, and it was the Democratic Congress that gave the money for all that, and they wanted to make him look bad too. So you can't say anything bad about President Reagan. He was one of the best presidents we've ever had, and I'm sorry you weren't here when he was president.
I think it's time for you to, I was here for all of that, I think it's time for you to reread David Stockman's account of the matter, his budget director. The deliberate creation of deficits.
Well, you've both talked about the deficit, and one thing that happened this week was a decision about a challenge to the line-item veto legislation.
Right.
How significant do you think this line-item veto power, as it has been crafted by the Congress, will be?
I'll just tell you, I think the one thing it'll do, it'll prevent any kind of government shutdowns in the future because it shifts the responsibility in the end to the president. He can line out objectionable parts of that. Now, he can't add money, and that's good. Can't add money to the appropriations, but riders that may be veto bait for him, he can X out and veto those riders, and he can veto certain parts of the spending that may not comport with his beliefs.
Does it work that simply, that a president can simply cross it off and the decision is done?
It can be, once again, can go back to Congress, and Congress will have an opportunity to override that. But in the end, at the end of the day, you need a tiebreaker. We didn't have that this time, and the President and the Congress couldn't agree, even on the language for a continuing resolution. As a result of that, the government was shut down. Now this really shifts, and this is a major shift in transfer of power from the Congress to the President.
But as a member of the Congress, are you concerned about that shift of power?
No, I support it. I think you have to have a tiebreaker. The American people see the commander-in-chief basically as the person in charge. We still have a very important role, and the President can't do anything without Congress agreeing to it. But when we are overzealous or where the President feels that, he will have the right now to veto that, and it's going to take 2/3 to overturn that.
Do you think it will have a specific effect on deficit spending?
Should have a positive effect on deficit spending because the President can now zero out parts of spending bills that he or she does not agree with, and that will help reduce the deficit. It's on the margins, but I think it's a
What do you then say to the lady who just called, pointing out correctly that Congress should, if it doesn't, have the power of the purse?
Well, Congress still has the power of the purse. The President can't spend money that Congress doesn't give them. Let me just add, 2 years under President Reagan, the Congress ran on continuing resolutions because the President Reagan vetoed budgets he thought they were too high. and Congress wanted to give more money than the president wanted to give. Under a line item veto, that would have reduced the deficit. But we missed the point when we talk about the 13 appropriation bills, because that's only a third of all federal spending. The other two-thirds are in entitlements, which are going up on autopilot every year without Congress or the president touching them, and interest on the national debt. And until you tackle those in a meaningful way, you're really not going to get to the deficit problem.
Next call is from Howell Township, New Jersey. You're on the air. Good morning.
Good morning. Happy 4th of July.
Thank you.
The reason I'm calling this morning is I've always voted since I was 20 years old as a Republican. I served in Vietnam. I'm a disabled combat wounded veteran from Vietnam. But I am now in a phase of my life where my children are getting ready to go to college. My mom, who is widowed, is on the Medicare. She's a widow of a civil service retired employee. And I seen an article that was covered by C-SPAN where they had a voters representation group that was totally non-Republican or Democratic. And they showed what the proposed budgets and the tax cuts were going to be. And they also showed, it was in the evening, the disproportionate benefits that were going to the more wealthy on the Republican programs versus the benefits that were not going to be given to the lower income folks on the Democratic side of the program.
So what's this all mean to you?
It means to me, as a person who's supporting a household with 2 children in college on $53,000 a year with a mortgage and living in New Jersey with a high tax rate, that the Republican Party has lost faith in us, the mid-American, the worker. They've lost faith in the elderly, in their promises to take care of them. And they come back with their figures and their rhetoric. But what I've been seeing is when you actually put the facts and figures on the line, the money of each program, the Democratic and the Republican, in their taxes is very similar, except it is disproportionately going to the wealthy on the Republican side, and on the Democratic side, it's going to the people that really need it.
All right, thanks for your call. Mr. Davis.
Well, first of all, under the Republican plan, your taxes would have been reduced to $1,000 if you've got 2 kids living at home. $500 per child exemption would have put that back in your pocket immediately. There are some other cuts in that program as well, but that would have been immediate, and I don't think you're wealthy. $53,000 a year with a couple of kids at home. On the loans and the Medicare, the benefits would not have been cut. They would have been increased, but by allowing choice and the market forces to work on that, we felt we could have held down the increase in those costs. And besides, Medicare Part A is going bankrupt anyway. The trustees just came back and showed that we're losing $25 million a day that we're paying out on Medicare, not taking in. And that's got to be fixed. And if nothing else, give the party courage for trying to tackle that issue and bring that to the forefront. We haven't brought that to a closure yet. But if you're a working American, it seems to me, that Republican proposal will give you some of the tax relief you want, and your benefits aren't to cut. Your student loans are still available to your kids, the educational opportunities and the like. So I would take issue. I didn't see that particular panel. But you are the typical American. I think this program was made to benefit. Now, if you're sitting on welfare and not working with 2 or 3 kids, maybe you don't come out as well under the Republican plan, and I would be the first to concede that.
With respect, Congressman, I think that tap dances slightly, if not past the letter, certainly past the spirit of the caller's question. What you could hear in his voice was the feeling that the country is becoming more unequal and unfair. And in fact, if you look at the reports from the Bureau of Statistics, the GAO, the Census Department, come out recently, it shows that the distribution of income and wealth in this country has become very, very, very sharply more unequal in the last 10 years. Now, as someone who has no partisan interests and who hasn't failed to notice that Congress was Democratic for a lot of that time, and
we don't argue, we don't disagree with those facts.
I think it's a bipartisan responsibility, so to say, but it remains a fact that the distribution of wealth and income in the United States is becoming much more like classical class-divided hierarchical societies like the one I originate from than it has ever been before, and that no number of figures or promises on the juggling of different pieces of legislation is going to unconvince people that that's happening.
But let me make 2 points. In the Republican plan, first of all, on the tax cuts, the $500 per income child credit, the income was, I mean, you're over $110,000 a year, you don't get the tax credit. period. On Medicare Part B, we means test. If you're making over $120,000 a year, $125,000 a year, you have to pay the full boat on Medicare. There is a means test on Part B. Part A, which is the part that's paid out of the trust fund, everybody would get. So that is hardly, helping the wealthy. That is trying to bring it back more toward the middle-income Americans, where it's targeted at. But we have lost the rhetorical war, I think, with the Democrats at this point. And I think this caller illustrates the fact that you talk enough about the rich versus poor and the haves and the have-nots, you can be convincing. But I really believe that the facts are otherwise.
But how's he supposed to feel when he's sitting here, there, disabled from having served his country, reading about corporate top-level remuneration? You can open any paper any day.
Government doesn't set corporate.
No, we're talking about the society, not the government, about what is happening in the United States.
Yeah, we've done more to cut corporate welfare over the last 2 years in Republican Congress than has been done in 2 decades.
But the top-level remuneration seems to be going up very, very
same for baseball players and entertainers.
In other words, the upward redistribution of income, the redistribution of income towards the rich seems to have gone on in spite of this. And then you look at the front page of the Washington Post last Sunday. Dan Morgan had an amazing story. $10 billion more have been given to the military-industrial complex by Congress than even Clinton asked for, and he asked for a lot, to the point where all across the South they're having to create special new boondoggle projects just to make sure the money gets spent. They literally have been given more than they know what to do with.
No,
there are scandals of this kind in every paper every day, and it's staring everybody in the face. The country is
spending more money on military is not a scandal. Military spending has dropped each of the last 10 years in this country. Defense spending has dropped, where next year we'll be spending more money on interest on the national debt than we will for all of national defense together. I think many of us, including some of the military leaders that have served under this president, are very, very cautious and think maybe defense spending is something we've cut a little bit too much. We've made this mistake after the Revolutionary War, and we ended up fighting the War of 1812. After World War I, we disarmed, and we had to rearm for World War II. We need to downsize military, but we've done that in a significant way. 55% of the federal, in 1955, 62% of the federal budget was defense. Today it's 17%.
I didn't say this money was actually being spent on the defense of the country. To the contrary, it's being spent on what I've heard called unsmilingly the contractor community.
Let me get a call.
Which is also the donor community.
But that's research and development, much of that.
Yes.
Fremont, Ohio, good morning.
Hello. First I want to say I was raised as a Democrat. And my first vote was for John Kennedy. And then I voted independent for a few years. Now I'm a Republican, because the Democratic Party now is definitely not the party of my father. He's the one that told me to always vote straight Democrat, which through the years I've seen the things that they do, and my morals just won't let me vote for him anymore.
So this will be your first vote for a Republican?
Oh, no. I've voted for Republicans ever since Ronald Reagan. The only Democrat I ever voted for was John Kennedy. I went independent for a while.
Was it your morals that guided you on that occasion, ma'am?
Well,
I feel I have to ask.
I see the lying. I've watched the entire thing of the Whitewater hearings. Even to staying up till 5 in the morning sometimes to watch them. And you can see that these people that came up here from Arkansas are doing a big cover-up.
Caller, thanks.
If I were partners with someone that was getting all that money, I'd be mad as hell if I didn't get any of it.
All right. Thank you very much for calling in from Fremont, Ohio. We have about 7 minutes left in our program. However, Congressman Davis has to leave the table because it is the 4th of July, one of the busiest days for politicians going.
It is the busiest day of the year.
What do you have ahead of you?
I've got a parade in Fairfax City. I've got a parade in Dale City. I'm going to be out in Vienna, Herndon. We've got fireworks tonight out there. So it's a long day. It's the longest day of the year if you're in elective office, but it's a great day. We look forward to this every year.
Hot dogs and hamburgers.
Let me just thank all the calls. I think they've been very good from both sides. this is still a country with a lot of ticket splitters. And as you can tell, well, we've had some partisans call in today. Still a lot of issues up in the air. This could be an interesting campaign year, and I appreciate all the attention that your listeners and watchers give every day. Thanks C-SPAN for what they're doing.
Thanks for coming in on the holiday.
Okay, thank you very much.
Christopher Hitchens will continue at the table with your comments and calls.
Single-handed.
Single-handedly. I think you're up to it, Christopher. Let me just ask you a question. This is amusing, I guess, more than a news story on the front page of the New York Times about the meaning of patriotism. Dirk Johnson has written this piece. He says, since the fall of communism, the absence of a superpower enemy, and the advent of an all-volunteer armed forces, Americans' feelings about their own country have little to do with battlefields and are no longer so easy to define. They've become complicated by domestic debates about issues like race, immigration, and environmentalism. You can't narrow it down to just our country anymore. It's the whole planet, said a 43-year-old waitress at a restaurant in Sycamore, Illinois.
Oh yes, I saw that. Now, didn't she go on to say that if they cut down trees in the Amazon, it affects everybody?
That's right. That's right.
Well, that was an intelligent observation, obviously, but I thought the premise of the piece. There are always a lot of soft pieces in the press on the 4th of July. Usually, sort of slightly feel-good ones. I've got one I'd like to mention, actually.
Sure.
But the working assumption that patriotism would have to be defined in a martial manner is, for a start, untrue, or at least very questionable. I'm not saying this just because it is Independence Day, but it seems to be very obvious that the heart of American patriotism is the fact of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. That's what your officials take their oath to, quite correctly. That's what we swear to uphold and defend. That's what makes the distinctive element of the American Revolution, and that's something anyone can be proud of because it's a very well-written essay in liberty. So I thought that the article sort of zigzagged around and failed really to score any points at all.
Do you think Americans, whether the premise is in the Constitution or not, as when you travel, talk to taxi drivers and like, are questioning what it means to be American, be patriotic these days?
I mean, the country's always being remade and it's always in transition. And Scott Fitzgerald used to say, I read as well as talk to taxi drivers and barmen, by the way, used to say there are no second acts in American lives. I don't know why that's so well remembered, a remark of his, because it seems to me the reverse is the case. I mean, it's been in the process of being made ever since the 4th of July 1776, and the fact that the composition of the country is changing through immigration and natural wastage and so on is only the latest in a huge number of remaking.
I'll try to get 2 more calls in about the 5 minutes we have left at the table. Our next, fittingly, on the 4th of July is from Philadelphia. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Fine, sir.
Happy Independence Day.
Thank you.
I would just like to say that I used to be a registered Republican and now registered Libertarian for the simple fact that when you see people getting sworn in as either congressman, president, or senator, they take an oath to uphold the Constitution. And my real concern was with NAFTA and GATT, just to see that piece of legislation passed in a lame duck of the Congress and the Senate. Really, really upsetting because of just the way our tyranny and it was just our jobs are just going away.
Define what it means very briefly for you to be a libertarian.
Well, you believe in the constitutional values, what this country was founded on, and that's government in your lives.
Okay. Thanks for your call from Philadelphia. Libertarian Convention is actually meeting here in Washington today and tomorrow to nominate their candidate for president. We're going to be covering it both days. What do you think of the libertarian movement?
Well, I have some sympathy with the libertarian worldview, with the permanent distrust of the state, for example, and also with the concept of victimless crime, that there are certain things that the government just cannot be expected to take care of for you, including what you decide to put in your mouth or in your system, or with whom you're going to have sexual congress, or even how. But they, in that sense, say, hands off, and I'm all for them.
Can I bring you back then to your cigarette comment on that?
Oh, sure.
Because you suggested you were critical of Senator Dole for his comments about it, but you do have sympathy for the view that government shouldn't be involved in regulating or commenting about nicotine addiction.
Well, That's right, but what Senator Dole was saying was as far as he knew the habit wasn't addictive, which seems to me a ridiculous proposition. Probably couldn't be said by anyone who, I mean, like Senator Dole isn't a smoker or slave to it like I am. And also, obviously, has too close a relationship to the huge donation he's had from the tobacco industry. That seemed to me to be the salient point there. But I mean, I've noticed that, yes, there is a tendency in the health-minded authoritarian campaign against tobacco for it to be a movement that actually targets not the producers but the consumers. And yes, that there is a nanny state element to it that I resent. And so I like the libertarian tone of voice, and I'm glad that they're there. The problem is that what they tend to say is that also the government has no business regulating child labor either, and things like that. So there we part company.
Santa Barbara, California, last call for this segment. Good morning.
Good morning. I was curious that with the terrorism bill, there was a rider attached on there where habeas corpus was lost or written away. And it seemed to me that the press has pretty much avoided this. There hasn't been a lot written about it or talked about, and I find that really dangerous because that seems to be an important part of, American recourse for Americans, and it's now gone. And I don't think a lot of people truly understand the meaning of what it was and what we've lost.
Thanks very much. Would you explain?
Yeah, I'm extremely glad someone brought that up, and I'm ashamed it wasn't me, in fact. I mean, people should read what it says in this bill. The best short article about it was by Nat Hentoff in his column Sweet Land of Liberty in the Washington Post about 3 Saturdays ago, if you want to pull it off or download it from anywhere. And one of the points he made was, where is the protest about this? I think Senator Moynihan said something. I think there were a couple of other squeaks raised, but it was a decision of immense moment, and in effect it does make habeas corpus void if the word terrorism can be attached to any aspect of the crime that's alleged against somebody. I thought it was a scandalous piece of legislation, and it's one of the reasons why I so much distrust partisanship by partisanship stuff, because if the Republicans had proposed it, it would have been very much more opposed. It's one of those things that only the Democrats can get away with doing. That's how sordid it is.
Our time is just about up, but you had one story that you said you wanted to mention that was sort of the lighter piece.
The heartwarming 4th of July type story. One of the ones today it's on, I made a note of what page it's on, A16 of the New York Times. It says that intermarriage, which is the most authentic form of integration after all, the most unarguable form, between black and white Americans is going up, steadily upward increasing curve, and there are lots of excuse me, you see what I mean about the smoking factor. There are lots of very nice sort of feel-good bits at the opening of the story. And then, just towards the end, you get let down with a bump because it says a large number of black young women feel they have no choice but to marry, as the article says, outside their race because of the enormous numbers of young black eligible men who are now in jail. So the story doesn't end as heartwarmingly as it begins.
Why do you think that's especially appropriate for a day like today?
Well, I think it originally ran where it did, as a sort of 4th of July type story, and then you find as you go into it that the evidence isn't as uniformly encouraging as you might have thought.
How will you be spending this holiday?
Working as usual.
Not going down to the mall or anything like that?
No, I'm going to take the weekend off. I'm going to go up to Long Island, but it's a weekday, so it's a work day for me.
In Washington, by the way, many of the people who live in the area come down to spend the day here. Lots of activities, all sponsored by the National Park Service, all free to people, including a fireworks display. And that's it for our time. I want to thank Christopher Hitchens for being at the table, along with Congressman Davis, who just left us on this 4th of July holiday. Come back soon.
Absolutely.
We'll be back in a few minutes.
You're watching C-SPAN's Washington Journal. Coming up at about 9:10 Eastern Time, a preview of the Libertarian Party convention. It gets underway today in Washington. Our guest, David Nolan, founder of the Libertarian Party.
On American Perspectives, we'll hear from Arthur Megiddo, the editorial director of Jewish Light Publishing and author of Louis Farrakhan's biography, Prophet of Rage.
From his perspective and the perspective of many other blacks, there is a certain comparative truth to what he says. Yet no one in polite society can publicly agree with him about almost anything, because to most whites and many blacks, he is the new Satan.
Reflections on World War II and the Korean War from Rhode Island Republican Senator and veteran John Chafee.
The invasion of South Korea by North Korea was the first post-war World War II military attempt for expansion, the first military attempt for expansion by the Soviets or one of its satellites. If that invasion had gone unchallenged, I don't believe anyone would question that the Soviets or Soviet satellites would be emboldened throughout the world.
Then, the mayor of Hamden, Connecticut, Lillian Clayman, at the Women's Campaign School at Yale.
Sexism happens to me, it happened to me, it happens to women I know, and it continues to happen. And make no mistake about it, while you are deciding to run for political office, while you are running for political office, while you are holding political office, it will happen to you. And in my experience, it is the most debilitating aspect of being a candidate for office that can occur.
Saturday, American Perspectives begins at 8 with Arthur Megiddo, Senator John Chafee at 9, and Lillian Clayman at 10 Eastern and Pacific Time. On the next book notes, nationally syndicated columnist and Pulitzer Prize-winning author Paul Greenberg. He's observed and written about the Clintons for 20 years.
I remember that during the 1992 campaign, I got a call from, it must have been Deborah Orrin of the New York Post, asking, well, what is Bill Clinton really like? And I had been asked that question so many times that I simply burst out laughing. And she said, oh, you're laughing because I'm new on the campaign trail and you've been down it so many times and you're just laughing at my ignorance. And I was a little hurt by that she would think that I would be so rude. I said, no, ma'am, it has nothing to do with that. It's as if I just spent the last couple of days in a house of mirrors on some carnival sideshow and had never been able to find my way out, had never been able to find my way to the center of this problem, who is the real Bill Clinton.
Paul Greenberg of the Arkansas Democrat Gazette, author of No Surprises, 2 Decades of Clinton Watching, on Book Notes, Sunday night at 8 Eastern and Pacific Time. As America chooses its president, the network that cable created prepares to take you to the conventions. Political parties are gearing up for the '96 election, and C-SPAN is gearing up too, to bring you more hours of coverage than any other network. Our live coverage of the Libertarian Party convention continues through Saturday. See Campaign 96 from beginning to end on C-SPAN, the political network of record.
C-SPAN's Washington Journal continues.
And next on this 4th of July holiday, we will turn to coverage of the Libertarian Party. The next 3 days, the Libertarians are in Washington, D.C. for their quadrennial nominating convention. Joining us live from the Hyatt Regency Hotel on Capitol Hill, just a couple blocks from the U.S. Capitol, David Nolan, who is the founder of the Libertarian Party. Good morning, Mr. Nolan.
Hi, Susan.
I want to tell our audience before we get started that there's a lot of activity behind you there as the hotel gets ready for your members. How many people are coming there for the convention?
We're expecting approximately 1,000 delegates, alternates, and observers at this convention.
What exactly will be happening?
Over the next 3 days, we will be finalizing our platform, listening to a number of speakers, and most importantly, choosing the 2 candidates, the presidential and vice presidential candidate, who will head up our national slate of approximately 1,000 candidates around the country.
How many presidential candidates are vying this year?
We have 3 serious contenders, people who have been in the race for several months, and interestingly enough, about 5 others have popped out of the woodwork in the last 2 or 3 days. I guess this is a sign that we're growing up and becoming a major party like the Republicans and Democrats, in that 8 years ago, say, it was difficult to find anybody who wanted to run. It was kind of like, well, why would I want to do that? And now all of a sudden, everybody wants to run as the Libertarian candidate.
Would you mind spending just a minute, and I know you can't take sides in this, but just telling us about those three top contenders, Harry Browne, Rick Tompkins, and Irwin Schiff. Tell us a little bit about the kind of person who is, in each case, who is seeking the presidential nomination for your party.
Certainly. Harry Browne is about 62 or 63 years old. He is an experienced public speaker. He's the publisher and editor of an independent financial newsletter that tells people what he thinks is going to be happening in the stock market and other investment vehicles around the world. His area of expertise really is economics and world events. Irwin Schiff is a longtime activist in the crusade against the federal income tax. Mr. Schiff believes, and has some interesting documentation to at least corroborate his point, that the whole federal income tax is not, in fact, legally enacted, that Americans have no obligation to pay the income tax. This is not the position of the Libertarian Party per se, but it's one of the things Mr. Schiff feels the American people ought to hear about. Finally, Mr. Tompkins is a longtime activist from the state of Arizona. He's been head of the party down there. He's run for office. He, like the other two gentlemen, is a good speaker, a clear thinker, and a persuasive presenter of the ideals of liberty.
I want to, again, just give our audience some context for you there. I know it's a little disconcerting for you talking to us this morning with all that activity behind you.
Setting the stage.
The hotel where this is happening has been a very busy place on this 4th of July. They this morning had a final meeting of a group of the National Education Association, are breaking down after that breakfast meeting to bring in 1,000 members of the Libertarian Party. So our sympathies are with them, and we'll do our best to allow David Nolan to hear your calls from around the country. We're going to take calls for the next...
Okay, it's kind of ironic, if I may say, that the NEA immediately preceded us, because the NEA is probably the single largest organized lobby for socialism left in America, and every single NEA delegate that I saw in this hotel, I mean literally every single one that had a political button or t-shirt on it, was supporting the Clinton-Gore ticket. So somebody who came to this hotel not knowing anything about American politics would assume that the two leading candidates for president in this country were Clinton and Harry Browne. They would not even know that Mr. Dole was in the race.
How many libertarians are there? How many belong to the party?
Okay, there are about 14 or 15,000 dues-paid members of the National Party. There are about 10 times that many, or 150,000, registered libertarians. You can't register as a libertarian in many states, but you can in an increasing number, and we have approximately 150,000, 175,000 registered party members, and we have about 2 million people who voted Libertarian at least once in the last election for at least one office.
What does it mean, in your words, to be a libertarian?
Well, of course, the word libertarian simply means someone who is a believer in liberty, someone who supports the idea that the individual should be free to follow his or her own dreams and ambitions as long as they don't interfere with the rights of others. So libertarian simply means someone who loves and believes in liberty.
Let me ask you before calls, what is the party's position on some of the people in this country who have taken anti-governmentism to the extreme of violence?
I'm glad you asked that question, because interestingly enough, the Libertarian Party is the only political party in America, and probably the only political organization in America, that specifically requires people to sign a statement that they do not advocate the initiation of force to achieve social or political goals. Now, we realize that cannot prevent somebody with bad intentions from lying on the application, but we take more precautions to discourage people of that persuasion than any other political organization in the country. We are avowedly nonviolent.
First question for you is from Atlanta. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Nolan.
Yes.
I've been a student of libertarian thought since 1970. I began at a very early age. I was turned on at the age of 13 to the writings and thoughts of Mr. Robert Lefebvre.
Okay.
My first question would be to you, if you could illuminate briefly for us your familiarity with Mr. Lefebvre's ideas. I have a second question as well, though, which is much more important and runs to the impact of the Libertarian Party with regard to the ethical matter of voting. Mr. Lefebvre made it clear to me very early on that no authentic libertarian would ever submit a question of right to the opinion of a majority, and I wonder if you could address that issue for us in a way that is somewhat deeper than the normal jazz that we hear, that it is my right to engage this process of submitting rights to the opinion of a majority. I would very much appreciate to hear your views.
That sounded a little bit more like a speech than a question to me, but I'll try to respond as quickly and succinctly as I can. Yes, I am familiar with the writings of Mr. Lefebvre. He had a school called the Freedom School in Colorado for many years in the 60s and 70s, which he shut down shortly before I happened to move to Colorado in 1970. So I just missed actually meeting Mr. Lefebvre in person. Mr. Lefebvre is one of a number of individuals, and I suppose I'm another, who has his own definition of libertarianism. I do not accept all the things that Mr. Lefebvre said. His opinions as to what were appropriate tactics to bring about a greater degree of liberty in this country or anywhere were simply his own opinions. I think the definition of a libertarian is what kind of a society are you trying to achieve, not what tactics do you personally feel are appropriate.
Does the Libertarian Party have a web page that people can follow up with? Well, can you tell me the web address?
To be perfectly honest, I cannot. I could if somebody had given it to me, but I don't. I know you can just go on the web and type in the keyword libertarian on your browser, and it will take you to the Libertarian Party. You'll get a list of appropriate pages. You will get the Libertarian Party, you'll get the Advocates for Self-Government, you'll get the Cato Institute, you'll get a lot of libertarian organizations that have web pages. It's very easy to find.
Next is Wallingford, Connecticut. Good morning.
Hi, good morning. How are you?
Fine, sir. What's your question?
Good. Actually, what I was trying to discern from Mr. Nolan was the basic history of the Libertarian Party, in that I didn't understand its origins and linkage, either constitutionally or movement-wise. Libertarian is a pretty wide term to put a party under, and I would like a little more history with regards to it.
Okay, I'll try again to keep it succinct. The Libertarian Party is celebrating its 25th anniversary at this convention. The thing that motivated a small group of us in Colorado to form the Libertarian Party was Richard Nixon's speech on television in August of 1971, where he came on and announced that he was demonetizing the dollar, putting a freeze on wages and prices. This was a clear contravention of free market principles. Most of us at that time believed that although the Republican Party might not be too great on personal issues, civil liberties issues, they were at least pretty decent on economic issues. And Mr. Nixon proved that notion to be false. So a group of us that day looked at each other and said, we obviously need a new party. I hope you can hear me clearly. It's pretty noisy here.
We can hear you just fine. The problem is just for you with all the noise around you.
I can hear you too. All right.
Next is Portland, Oregon. Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Laurel, and I've recently been in tax court with Irwin Schiff, and it kind of bothered me to hear David. I've been a libertarian since 1980, a card carrying, as they say, and it bothered me to hear you say that Irwin Schiff's sense of the income tax was that it was illegally imposed or something like that, when that's not the issue at all. It's a constitutional tax. However, it's imposed as a mandatory direct tax, which is not the way it was written.
Okay, please understand, I'm not an official spokesman for Mr. Schiff. I was asked to give a thumbnail sketch of each of the three candidates, and since Mr. Schiff's greatest concern is with the income tax, I just wanted to indicate that he felt that the income tax was not properly constituted or administered. Anyone who wants to know more about Mr. Schiff's position in detail should certainly contact Mr. Schiff. I don't want to be putting words in his mouth.
We'll also be seeing him and the other candidates during C-SPAN's live coverage of the Libertarian Convention. We're there today and tomorrow.
And Saturday for the nomination.
That's right. And I might conclude this by saying that on Sunday, the person who secures the party's nomination will be a guest at our table for C-SPAN's Washington Journal on Sunday. May I ask you, does the party platform have an official position on taxes?
The Libertarian Party's platform position is that in an ideal world, all taxes should be eliminated completely, that people should pay for the goods and services that they desire out of their own pockets on a free market basis, that private industry and charity should provide all needed services. Now, we also realize that taxes aren't going to go away in the next 2 years or 4 years or probably even in the next 10 or 12 years. Our goal is to repeal as many taxes as rapidly as possible. We feel that the personal income tax is the worst tax because it's the most invasive. It's the one that's used to keep control of people, to manipulate them, to regulate and control society. We're against taxation in principle. We want to get rid of all of it as soon as we can. We feel that the income tax is the worst. We call for its immediate abolition. Mr. Schiff claims that we don't have to abolish it because it doesn't even really exist in the first place.
From today's schedule at the Libertarian Convention, a number of items, the delegates will be debating the platform this morning before lunch, and there will also be a reenactment of George Washington's farewell address. Why is that chosen?
Well, because in that address, Washington, who of course was the father of our country, and I think a very far-seeing man, made some very prophetic statements as to the dangers that faced the new nation. We'd just come out of a war, the American Revolution, which we libertarians regard as the only true revolution. We consider ourselves the spiritual heirs of the American Revolution. Washington made some very cogent observations on the nature and threat of government and why we must be vigilant against its excesses and dangers.
Benicia, California, good morning.
Hi, I would like to know, long-time listener, first-time caller. I'd like to say that I don't agree with the Libertarian Party, and I think that socialism is the way to go. And I was watching some reruns of the Iran-Contra hearing that my family had taped. I don't want to comment on that, but how come you don't have any spokespeople from the nation?
I can't hear this caller. He's breaking up a little.
Oh, that's right. The last question was for us. It's just he was wondering why you were on by yourself without anyone to refute your points of view. And if you watch a lot, sir, you know that we get everybody at this table over time. This is just an opportunity this morning before this event begins to hear from the founder of the party and get some context for the discussions that are here being held over the next 3 days. Let me ask you, Mr. Nolan, there's a press release that's been put out by your party where they suggest that it is an oxymoron for the Libertarians to have decided on Washington, D.C. for their meeting place. Would you comment?
That's interesting because, of course, for those listeners who aren't familiar with the term, an oxymoron is a phrase that is self-contradictory. Like George Carlin used to say, jumbo shrimp. Your mind kind of boggles. Well, which is it? And the idea that a party dedicated to eliminating 80 or 90% of what Washington does, or what the people in Washington do to control and regulate our lives, would choose this city as the site of our convention, does seem somewhat contradictory. However, realistically, we realize that the majority of the political press, the people who cover the political scene and are most interested in it, are located here, and we thought we would make your job easier by coming to Washington and holding our convention rather than asking you all to troop out to Denver or Dallas or Los Angeles or wherever.
Greensboro, North Carolina, you're next for Mr. Nolan.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Mr. Nolan, I had a question, or I'd like to invite your comment on a aspect of libertarian thought which you stated in response to what is libertarianism, and it's the second clause of the standard answer. That is, people should be free to engage in whatever activities they wish as long as they don't infringe on the rights of others.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you very well. It's very, very noisy here now.
How about me? Can you hear me better?
I'm sorry?
Yes, sir. You want him to comment on that clause of the Constitution?
No, that clause of the definition of libertarianism.
That is not the Constitution he's quoting.
Oh, I'm sorry. I guess I had a little difficulty hearing as well. Did you hear enough of it to be able to comment on that clause?
Well, I'm not sure how he wants me to comment on it. Yes, that is indeed the other half of the coin. We believe that in addition to rights, you obviously have responsibilities, and those responsibilities include, most importantly, to extend the same conditions of freedom to others as you ask for yourself. You do not aggress on other people. You do not use force against them. You do not use fraud against them.
In closing, let's get an idea of the future of the party. It will be on, the Libertarian Party will be on the ballot in how many states in November?
As far as we know, all 50.
And last time around, how many people voted for the Libertarian candidate?
About 500,000.
And what will you be doing this year to increase turnout?
Well, it wasn't so much the question of turnout. I think we had a situation last time, and it may well arise next time, that many, many people who were unhappy with the two major parties for very good and sufficient reasons, chose to vote for Mr. Perot, who had a lot more money and got a lot more media visibility. And consequently, I think our vote would have been much higher had it not been for Mr. Perot's presence in the race. And once again this year, we may find that Mr. Perot gets a larger number of votes, assuming that he runs again, which it looks like he will, than our candidate, whoever our candidate turns out to be. The point I'd like to make is that Mr. Perot's so-called party is not a real party. It is a vehicle for the exercise of ego by one man. He doesn't have 1,000 candidates running. He doesn't have a platform. He just has a few notions. He's simply one guy with a big ego who likes to get in front of a camera. Our strength is that we're developing a grassroots organization. We've been in existence for a long time. We have a refined and consistent platform. We know grassroots organizing. We're going to get on the ballot in all 50 states by spending maybe $300,000. Mr. Perot's going to spend, or last time spent something like $18 million to do it because he had to do it the hard way, which is to say he had to buy his way onto the ballot. And you take away Perot's money and the Reform Party evaporates.
David Nolan is a founder of the Libertarian Party. Hometown was Washington, D.C., currently lives in Mission Viejo, California. And I want to thank you for being there on the opening day of the Libertarian Party convention.
Well, thank you, Susan. I just wish it were a little quieter in the background.
Well, I understand that one of the many things you do now is host your own television show in California. Radio show. Well, you're used to some of the vagaries of broadcasting.
Absolutely.
Thanks again for being here this morning.
Thank you.
I would tell our audience about what's happening. As you can see there in the hotel, still a few minutes until they get it all put together. Very hectic scene there, but wanted to give you an opportunity to hear from Mr. Nolan. We've got our cameras there ready to televise this event live. And we will be back to it in about 20 minutes when they bring the gavel down. Again, full coverage today, expected to last until about 5:30 Eastern Time. And the winning candidate of the Libertarian Party, the presidential nominee, will be here at the table to answer your calls Sunday on Washington Journal. During our next segment, since it is 4th of July, we will return to American history. Joanne Blacoe, who is a park ranger at Independence Park in Philadelphia, will tell us about the Liberty Bell. Happy holiday. But one of the things that one always thinks of in Philadelphia, no matter what day of the year it are all of the monuments and sites connected with the earliest days of American democracy. Joining us right now is Joanne Blacoe. She